Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. It started with a photograph, one that shouldn't exist. The image had no date, no watermark, no digital trace. It was printed on thick matte paper, yellowing at the edges as though it had been tucked away for decades. And in that photo, a family of 4 stood smiling in front of an old house that no one remembered building, on a street that didn't show up on any map. Their faces were too perfect. Not flawless, but still, too still. There was no motion in their expressions, like they weren't frozen in time, but hollowed by it. Caleb Wren didn't remember receiving the envelope. He simply found it one morning, tucked beneath his apartment door, sealed in brown wax with an ornate W pressed into it. At first, he thought it was a prank, maybe something left by his neighbor, Janine, who dabbled in vintage stationery and cryptic puzzles. But when he turned the photo over, a single sentence had been handwritten in neat cursive: "This is your inheritance. You must go alone." That was how it began. Caleb should have ignored it, burned the photo, tossed the envelope into the trash and gone on with his life. But the problem was, he recognized the house. It had appeared once before, in a dream he had when he was 7. Just a flash, gabled roof, chipped blue paint. A twisted willow tree beside the porch that looked like it was trying to crawl away. He never told anyone, but that dream left him waking up screaming for 3 nights straight. His mother had dismissed it as night terrors back when she still tucked him in, but it haunted him, lingering in a way dreams aren't supposed to. Now it was back, real, tangible. Curiosity was only part of what pulled Caleb in. The truth was, he had nothing to lose. His parents were dead, car crash 5 years back. His sister gone. Missing under circumstances too twisted to explain. His job barely paid enough to cover rent. The apartment felt more like a waiting room than a home. When he researched the house, or tried to, he found nothing. But he couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was watching to see what he would do next. He packed a bag that same night. Just clothes, a flashlight, a journal, and the photograph. He told Janine he was heading out of town for a few days to clear his head. Her eyes lingered on him longer than usual, like she wanted to say something but didn't. Like she knew something. But in the end, she just nodded. The address on the photo's back led to a rural highway upstate. Caleb drove for hours under a slate sky that threatened rain but never delivered. As the miles passed, his GPS began to glitch, the screen freezing or flashing strange coordinates that didn't make sense. At one point, the display simply shut off and wouldn't come back on. Then he saw the turnoff. The road wasn't paved. It cut into dense woods like a wound, flanked by dying trees and an eerie silence. No wind, no birds, just the crunch of gravel under tires. Caleb hesitated, foot on the brake. Every nerve screamed at him to turn back, but the same pull that led him there refused to let go. He pressed on. By the time he reached the clearing, dusk had crept in like smoke. The house stood at the center, exactly as in the photograph. Peeling paint bordered windows, the crooked porch, and that willow tree, skeletal and hunched. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the gravity here worked differently. There were no other cars, no neighbors. No sounds but the faint creak of the house settling, like it was breathing. He stepped out of the car, gravel crunching underfoot. The grass was too tall, too dry, and when he brushed against it, it sliced his skin like razors. A drop of blood welled on his palm. He watched it bead and fall into the soil, where it was immediately absorbed. The front door wasn't locked. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a wide hallway lined with faded wallpaper. Dust floated in the stale air like particles suspended in time. The air smelled of rot and something coppery. Caleb's flashlight flickered as he stepped over the threshold. He told himself he'd just look around, take notes, Maybe sleep in the car if things felt too weird. But with each step deeper into the house, that plan started to decay. The house didn't feel abandoned. It felt patient, like it had been waiting specifically for him. Rooms branched off the hallway, a dining room with broken chairs surrounding a long, scarred table. A sitting room filled with moth-eaten furniture, and a fireplace stuffed with ashes that hadn't cooled. The photos on the walls were blurred, the faces scratched out. One of the frames contained a mirror instead, but it didn't reflect Caleb, just the empty room behind him. He snapped a photo with his phone. The screen showed him standing in the mirror, but smiling, his eyes pitch black. He deleted the image, heart thudding. He tried to leave. The door wouldn't open. He twisted the knob, kicked it, slammed his shoulder against it. But the door didn't move. It wasn't locked. It simply refused. Windows were boarded from inside with nails that looked fresh. He checked his phone. No signal. Then the house sighed. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't the wind. It was a long, low exhale that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Caleb froze. The temperature dropped. He could see his breath. From upstairs, a floorboard creaked. He hadn't gone up yet. He hadn't planned to, but the sound repeated. Step. Pause. Step. Like someone pacing. Hello, he called out. The pacing stopped. He didn't want to go up. Every instinct screamed to stay away. But something darker whispered, you're already inside. What difference does it make now? He climbed the staircase, flashlight flickering like a dying candle. The steps groaned under his weight. At the top was a long corridor with 5 doors, 3 on the left, 2 on the right, all closed. One had a symbol carved into it, a spiral with jagged lines radiating outward, like a cracked eye. He chose the last door on the right. It creaked open to reveal a child's bedroom. Toys scattered across the floor, wallpaper peeled like shedding skin. On the bed lay a stuffed bear with one eye missing, and stitched into its chest, a Polaroid. It was a photo of Caleb sleeping. In this house, his face was pale, mouth slightly open. But what made his stomach twist was that something stood beside him in the picture, shrouded in shadow, its hands nearly touching his face. He hadn't taken that picture. He hadn't even been in this room until now. Then he saw the closet door creak open. Not fast, just a few inches. He didn't wait. He ran. Down the stairs, into the hallway, back toward the front door. But the house had changed. The entrance was gone. In its place was a blank wall, lined with hooks for coats that were no longer there. The wallpaper pattern had shifted. Now it was the same spiral symbol, repeating endlessly. Then, from the dining room, he heard voices. Not words, just murmurs, like people praying through clenched teeth. Caleb turned and peeked inside. The table was no longer empty. 4 figures sat around it, their faces wrapped in cloth like mummies, hands twitching as if trying to recall how to eat. One of them raised a teacup to where its mouth should have been. The porcelain cracked, and a stream of black liquid poured down its chest. They didn't notice him, but the 5th chair was empty, waiting. He backed away, turned, came face to face with a girl, maybe 12 years old, barefoot in a nightgown stained at the hem. Her hair was long, tangled. Her eyes were wrong. One pupil was vertical like a cat's. The other was missing altogether. You came back, she said softly. Caleb couldn't speak. They told me you would, she added. They said you're the last one. After you, the house can sleep again. He shook his head. I don't know you. I've never been here before. You have, she said. You just forgot. They make you forget, until it's your turn again. Behind her, the spiral symbol pulsed faintly on the wall, like it was alive. The girl stepped closer. You shouldn't have come alone. Caleb finally found his voice. What do you want from me? She smiled, a mouth too wide with teeth that didn't match. Not me, she whispered. Them. The lights flickered. The house groaned again, deeper now, hungrier. Then everything went black. When Caleb opened his eyes, it was morning. He lay outside, in the tall grass, just beyond the front porch. The house loomed behind him, silent and still. His car was gone. His phone was gone. Only the photograph remained in his pocket, but it had changed. Now it showed 5 figures at the dining room table, and Caleb was sitting in the 5th chair, smiling. His eyes were pitch black. The sky was too blue. Not the kind of blue that makes you want to take a picture or soak it in. It was artificial, unsettling, like someone had painted it with too many coats to hide something underneath. Caleb stared at it, lying in the brittle grass outside the house that should not exist. Fingers wrapped tightly around the photograph that now included him in its frozen frame of horror. He sat at that cursed table in the picture. His smile wide, unnatural. It was a smile that didn't feel like his. But he didn't remember sitting there. His hands were trembling. A breeze rolled past, whispering through the tall grass, but none of it reached the trees surrounding the clearing. They stood perfectly still, rigid, like guards waiting for something to happen. And the house, still, silent, rotting in slow motion, watched him. He felt its gaze, even without eyes. He rose to his feet slowly, every joint aching. Dirt clung to his clothes. His head pounded like he'd been drugged. The front porch loomed ahead, boards warped and weathered, the willow beside it casting a crooked shadow, even though the sun was nearly overhead. Caleb turned to look for the road, but it wasn't there. The path he had driven in on was gone. Where gravel had once crunched beneath tires now stretched an unbroken field, smooth and golden, swaying gently like a calm sea. No tracks, no car, no sign it had ever been there. He spun around, panic climbing like acid up his throat. Had he dreamed it? Hallucinated? The photograph in his pocket said no. He forced himself to walk toward the house again. Each step felt heavier, like the soil itself was trying to hold him back. He crossed the porch and reached for the door, but it was already open. It waited for him. He didn't remember leaving it open. He didn't remember anything after seeing that girl with the cat's eye and hearing her say he had come back. His foot crossed the threshold. The house exhaled. It wasn't a sound. Not really. It was a shift, a soft, rhythmic sigh that pulsed through the wood. The wallpaper, the air itself. Caleb clenched his fists, his breath quickening. The hallway was just as he remembered, only it wasn't. The spiral patterns had grown, blooming like mold along the walls, more vibrant than before, as if they fed off something, maybe off him. He turned left, entering the sitting room. The fireplace was cold now, the ashes gone. Furniture once cloaked in dust now stood bare, clean, rearranged into a welcoming half circle, like it had been waiting for guests, and someone had visited. On the arm of one chair sat a cup of tea, still steaming. He stepped back, and a floorboard behind him groaned. He spun around. Nothing. The room fell back into silence, but it wasn't empty. There was a pressure now, like a held breath, and it pressed against his ribs. He turned to leave and saw that the hallway behind him had changed. The stairs were gone. In their place another door. He hadn't seen that door before. It hadn't existed. But it was open, just slightly, like it was inviting him to look. He told himself no, said it aloud. No. But his feet didn't listen. The door creaked as he pushed it open further, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. The flashlight he'd packed was gone, vanished along with the car, the phone, everything. But he felt the pull. That same whisper that led him to the house in the first place. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a memory he didn't remember having. He descended. The air thickened as he moved down, stale and damp. The walls closed in. He had to crouch at one point, then crawl. His hands touched something wet. His breath echoed in the tight space, each inhale louder than the last. Then suddenly, the tunnel opened. He stood in a room underground, massive, round, the ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with mirrors, dozens of them. No frames. Just slabs of silver glass set into the stone like they'd grown there. But none of them showed him. Instead, Each mirror reflected a different version of the house. In one, the walls dripped with blood. In another, the house was submerged underwater, algae curling across broken windows. In a third, fire consumed every room, yet nothing burned. And in a fourth, his breath caught. It showed the dining room, where the figures still sat, unmoving. And in the chair, at the end, was him. His image turned toward the mirror and smiled. Caleb stumbled back. His shoulder hit one of the mirrors, and it didn't crack. It rippled, like water. Before he could move, it pulled him in. Darkness swallowed him whole. He landed hard on wooden floorboards. The scent of burning meat filled his nose. He rolled over and found himself in the kitchen, one he hadn't seen before. The light was dim, yellowed. A roast sat on the counter, half carved, the knife still embedded. But it wasn't meat. It was something else. Something with bones too long and skin too pale. He backed away, gagging. Then a figure appeared in the doorway. The girl. She was older now, 15, maybe 16, but her eyes were the same, one missing, one vertical. She looked tired, angry, but not at him. At the house. You slipped through, she said. They'll be mad. Where am I? He asked, though he already knew. Somewhere else. One of the in-between places, she said. They don't like when you look too deep. But they let you, because they think it'll keep you here. Caleb stared at her. What is this house? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the back door and opened it. Beyond was a black field under a red sky. The horizon rippled like heat waves, but there was no warmth, just a sound, a hum. They made it a long time ago, she said quietly, to keep themselves fed, not with blood, with fear. The house doesn't trap you. It lets you leave, but only after it's taken what it wants. I'm not afraid, Caleb said, though his voice shook. She turned to him slowly. You should be. Then something screamed. It didn't come from the girl. It didn't come from Caleb. It came from everywhere. A high, pitched wail that bent the walls, cracked the floor, and sent the ceiling into a seizure of dust. The mirrors shattered, if they were even mirrors, and the world buckled. He woke again, in the hallway, back at the top of the stairs. The doors were there now, all 5, and this time they were all open. From one he heard music, a lullaby on loop, sung by a woman whose voice cracked with every word. From another, the sound of water dripping, not fast, slow, measured, like something was counting. A third was filled with darkness that moved. And the fourth, he wasn't ready to look at the fourth. The fifth showed nothing. Just the spiral. Painted on every surface, every wall, every inch of the room. And in its center stood a man with no face, holding a mirror shaped like a heart. He turned back to leave, tried to. But the staircase behind him was gone again. And this time, in its place, the dining room stretched out, far longer than before, like it had grown into a hall. The table was still set. All 5 chairs were now filled, and the fifth Caleb, still smiling, turned and waved. His eyes, black as a void, twitched. Then the house whispered his name. Caleb. The voice came from every room. The girl was right. He should have been afraid. But it was too late now. The house had already begun to remember him. Caleb wasn't sure how long he'd been standing there, staring down the hallway that shouldn't exist. The walls pressed inward, not physically, but perceptually, like they were breathing, subtly expanding and contracting with each passing second. The air smelled faintly of old paper and mold, and under that, a sharp tinge of copper that made the back of his throat itch. Every open door pulsed with its own strange rhythm. They didn't lead to rooms. They led to conditions. Places ruled by rules he didn't understand, by presences he hadn't yet met, but already feared. He stepped back. The wooden floor creaked louder than it should have, echoing like a scream down the long corridor. As soon as the sound faded, the lullaby started again, drifting from the second room on the left. Same voice, same words. But this time, it was faster, urgent. The pitch fluctuated slightly, as if the person singing was trying to hold back sobs. He didn't want to hear it again. He turned away, and the hallway stretched. Not physically, not in a way he could point to. But suddenly, the end of it felt impossibly far. Like trying to run in a dream, and never reaching the door you see just ahead. The lights flickered overhead. Bulbs that hadn't been there before, now swinging gently on long cords. A gust of air passed through the corridor, cold and unnatural, carrying a sound beneath it. It wasn't wind. It was laughter, low, wet, childlike. Caleb spun to the source, but saw only the girl, the one-eyed girl again. This time seated at the top of the staircase that should have been gone. She sat calmly, legs folded, hands clasped in her lap. Her lips didn't move, but he heard her voice all the same. "Don't go into the room with the water." His breath hitched. She blinked, one eye, like a shutter closing over a lens, and was gone. No sound, no blur, just gone. Caleb stared at the space she had been, then at the door she had warned him against. A steady dripping echoed from within. It hadn't changed. Still slow, still precise. Like it marked something waiting to be let out. His body didn't want to move, but the house coaxed him forward. He wasn't in control, not fully. Every step he took felt like a compromise, like a small deal made without reading the fine print. He passed the music room. The lullaby ended. He passed the dark room. Something whispered his name inside it, not once, but twice. He stopped in front of the water room. He didn't mean to open the door, but the knob turned under his hand. His fingers were trembling. It clicked open easily, almost like it had expected him. Inside, the room was tiled, white and glossy, but stained in places where the grout had cracked and oozed black. A clawfoot tub sat in the middle, filled to the brim with still water. There were no windows. The air hung heavy, humid. A single bulb overhead buzzed like a trapped insect. The walls wept, small rivulets trailing down to the floor, pooling against the baseboards. He took one step in, and the door shut behind him. The moment it did, the water in the tub began to ripple, not from wind. There wasn't any, and not from vibration. Something was moving inside. Caleb took a step back toward the door and grabbed the knob. It was gone. There was no knob anymore, just smooth wood where it had once been. His heart pounded. His breath caught. Then he saw a finger rise from the tub. Long, slender, blue. It was followed by another, and another. A hand emerged, then a wrist, then the top of a head. Long, soaking hair clung to skin too pale, too waterlogged. A girl, no, a woman. Her face was slack, lips parted, and water spilled from her open eyes like tears. Caleb couldn't move. She didn't look at him. She looked through him. Then her mouth moved, slowly, as if each syllable weighed her down. "You left me here." He staggered back. "No, I don't know you." Her eyes narrowed. "You promised you wouldn't forget." The tub shattered, not burst, shattered, like glass. Water surged outward like a wave but never touched the floor. It hung in the air, suspended, encasing her body like a womb of liquid. She hovered there and then slowly began to float forward. Caleb turned, pressed himself against the wall. The water hissed around her as she drifted, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the dry tile. She reached out. "No!" he shouted, ducking beneath her arm, sprinting past where the door had once been. And then suddenly, it was there. The hallway. He stumbled out, gasping, and turned just in time to see the door slam shut behind him. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat, then faded into the wall. The girl with the one eye was waiting at the end of the hallway again. "I told you not to go in there," she said softly. He approached her, angry now. "What is this place? Why are you here? Why me?" She looked at him, her face unreadable. Then she pointed past him, toward the far wall, which had begun to bulge outward like a balloon stretched too thin. Cracks spider-webbed through the plaster, and a low hum filled the air. "They're waking up," she said. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hand, and the hallway shifted. Like a film reel stuttering, everything around them changed. The lighting darkened, the walls became damp, and the doors, every door, was gone. Only one remained now. A black door at the end of the corridor. Caleb's voice broke when he asked, "What's behind that?" Her eye glittered, and for the first time, he saw fear in her. "The beginning," she said. Then she vanished again. Caleb stood alone in the shifting hallway, staring at the final door. The black paint seemed to shimmer like oil, reflecting faint glimpses of places he hadn't been yet. He heard whispers, saw flashes of himself in different rooms. Older, younger, screaming, bleeding, laughing. Then the door opened. He didn't touch it, it simply opened. And beyond it was him. Another Caleb. But not a reflection, not a memory. He stood inside the doorway, face blank, holding a journal bound in black leather, the same one Caleb had packed when he came. He hadn't seen it since that first night. The other Caleb raised the book, opened it, and began to read. "Day 47, he said, voice flat. "Still no exit. The rooms change every time I sleep. I think the girl's dead now. Or part of the house." Caleb shook his head. "That's not real." The other him kept reading. "I've started hearing voices through the walls. They know I'm listening. I think I've been here longer than I remember. I think I was always here." He closed the book. Then he smiled. "You came back again. Just like always." Caleb stepped back. The hallway began to close. The ceiling sagged. The walls bent inward. And behind him, the sound of splintering wood and glass echoed. Something coming from the rooms he thought he'd escaped. The house was folding in on itself, rearranging again, rewriting its own rules. The other Caleb dropped the journal at his feet and stepped into the hallway. As he passed, Caleb saw something flicker across his skin. Spirals. Burned into his arms, his throat, his face. Carved in. Deep. Old. He whispered one final thing before vanishing into the blackness. "You were always meant to stay." Then he was gone, and the house closed the door behind him. Caleb stood alone, the journal at his feet. The pages were blank now, except for the last one. It read, "You will forget again, but the house won't." The journal trembled in Caleb's hands, as if it had a pulse of its own. The pages were brittle, yellowed at the edges, but they gave off no smell, not of paper, nor age. Just silence. The kind that clung to your skin and slipped into your ears, whispering nothing but waiting. On the last page, the sentence stared up at him. Stark and cruel in its simplicity, "You will forget again. But the house won't." He turned back the pages, one by one, hoping to find anything else. Some memory scribbled in the margins. Some sketch, some half-thought that would make this make sense. But the rest were blank, every single page. Blank yet heavy, like they used to carry stories. He could feel it, like echoes that hadn't quite faded. Something was missing. No, taken. He closed the journal and held it against his chest. His heart beat too fast. The house was changing again. He could hear it. The floors groaning beneath walls that weren't moving but feeling. The lights dimmed, not from power loss, but like they were being slowly snuffed out by something above. Something watching. Something breathing. A faint, scraping noise reached his ears. Papery, almost rhythmic. He turned. The hallway was gone. In its place stood a long library. Endless shelves that stretched beyond his vision, stacked with books of every size and shade. Their titles handwritten in languages he didn't recognize. Some glowed faintly, some blood inked down the spines. Others hissed, as though the very act of reading them would awaken something sleeping too lightly. Caleb stepped forward. The carpet under his feet squished. Wet. He looked down and saw inky footprints, his own, stretching ahead of him through the corridor of books, like he'd already been walking here for hours. They led past the first shelf, past rows of reading tables that had no chairs, and onward, into the gloom. The journal in his hand vibrated softly, like it wanted to be returned, like it belonged somewhere here. The books whispered. He couldn't hear what they were saying. Not exactly, but the sound pressed into his temples like pressure, forming words he couldn't translate but understood just enough to be afraid of. Names. He heard names being recited in reverse, and one of them was his. The whispers grew louder as he approached a table. On it lay a book, thicker than the rest, bound in gray skin that wasn't quite leather. No title on the cover. Only a familiar spiral, seared into the center with what looked like black glass. He didn't want to open it. He needed to. His fingers moved without asking him, flipping the cover open. The first page was his handwriting. Day 1 I arrived today. I don't remember driving here. I just remember the photo. The house pulled me in, the breath caught in his lungs. This was his journal, the one he thought was blank. But now, the words were returning, faintly at first, then more with each turn of the page. Day 2, something watches me through the upstairs mirror. When I close my eyes, I see a woman standing behind me. She cries ink. I think her mouth is sewn shut. Day 5, the girl is real. But she's not alone. There are others. They mimic people I knew. They know things I shouldn't have told anyone. Day 8, I tried to mark my way out. Scratched the hallway with a key. The mark was gone in an hour. I think the house heals, or forgets, or both. Each page pulled him deeper. Day 13, the spiral changes every night. It grows, moves. I dreamed of it once. When I woke up, it was tattooed behind my ear. Caleb dropped the book. The echo rang out too loud for such a soft object. The shelves groaned. Dust fell like ash from above. The whispers stopped. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, bare feet on wet floor, coming closer. He backed away, stepping over fallen books, his breath rasping in his throat. The journal pulsed in his arms again. When he looked down, ink blotted from between its pages, running down his wrists like blood. He tried to throw it away, but it stuck to his skin like it was sewn there. The footsteps stopped just out of view, behind a tall shelf. A woman's voice whispered, "You wrote us." Caleb froze. "We were just pages," she said, her voice wet and hollow until you gave us names. He didn't move. "You told our stories. You put us in this place. You forgot, didn't you?" From the shadows, something stepped forward. She looked like his mother, exactly like her. Same smile, same blue eyes. But her skin shimmered, too smooth, too perfect. Like a mannequin that learned how to breathe. Her arms were stitched with spirals, thin ink threads woven into flesh. She stepped closer. "You left us here. You turned the key and walked away. And now you come back again and again, forgetting what you did." Caleb's voice cracked. "I didn't write this. I never." She raised her hand. Behind her, the shelves trembled. Books began to open on their own. Pages fluttered, and the ink inside them bled, spilled into the air like smoke swirling around her form. "You made this house," she said, word by word, dream by dream. "And now it remembers what you tried to forget." Caleb ran. The shelves blurred past. Books fell in his wake, snapping shut like jaws. The journal seared into his chest now, burning hot. The library seemed endless. No exits. No windows. Just walls filled with screaming ink. Then, a door, cracked open, barely visible between two sagging shelves. He threw himself toward it, ripped it open, and fell through. Darkness, silence, and then a different room. He was in a small study now. One lamp flickered on a desk. A typewriter sat in the center. Fresh paper fed into it. The keys tapped themselves once. The letter C. He stepped forward, trembling, looked down at the page. CALEB, letter by letter. It typed his name again. Then the paper began to bleed. A hand reached out from the typewriter slot, black and long and skeletal. Fingers covered in ink. He screamed and stumbled back. The room snapped like a rubber band, folding in on itself. And then, he was outside again, in front of the house, just like the first day. Same car, same sky, same willow tree. He looked at his hands. The journal was gone. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "The inheritance is yours. This time, remember." Caleb turned around. The front door opened. Again. The house didn't welcome Caleb this time. It tolerated him. The front door didn't creak in greeting. It yawned open like a wound that had scabbed over and split again. The sky above still wore that unsettlingly perfect blue, not a cloud in sight, but the light felt off, filtered through something unseen. As if the sun itself wanted nothing to do with what lay beneath the gabled roof. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, the gravel underfoot unnaturally still. Not a leaf stirred, not a single insect buzzed. Even the air seemed to hesitate. He stepped forward. The floorboards didn't groan this time. They shifted, subtly, like adjusting to a familiar weight. The threshold welcomed his body like a returning organ. The door shut behind him on its own with a dull thud. No drama, just inevitability. Everything was the same, and nothing was. The hallway stretched out before him, warped and dim, but the spiral wallpaper had faded. In its place, blueprints lined the walls, literal blue, and white architectural plans, tacked up crookedly. They looked impossibly old, curling at the edges, but the ink was fresh, still wet in places. He brushed his fingers over one. It read Wren House, Foundation Face 1, his last name. Not a coincidence. Not anymore. He moved further in, running his eyes along the designs. Each one mapped a different part of the house, but none of them matched what he'd seen. There were doors on the plans that didn't exist in the real house. Whole wings. Elevators. Even a sub-basement with rooms labeled only by numbers. Room 13, Room 21, Room 34. Some were simply labeled Fargautien or UNSD 1. Near the bottom of a particularly twisted stairwell diagram was marked in red ink, D-O no T-B-Y-L-D-T-H-E MO-U-H. His fingers trembled. He turned a corner and found a table, piled with scrolls and files. More plans, more diagrams, and a journal, this one not his. Its leather binding was cracked, brittle. On the first page, in script too neat to be casual, was a title, The Making of the House, Notes from the First Architect. His stomach turned. He read, "We began with noble intent. The house was to be a sanctuary, a place where thought and fear could take form, where grief could be externalized and studied. But we misunderstood the power of memory. What we tried to build as containment became amplification. Emotion soaked the walls. The blueprints changed without our hands. Rooms added themselves. The house is thinking now." He stopped, looked up. The light bulbs above him flickered, then burned steady again. He kept reading. Each occupant leaves behind a residue. Fear is thickest, but guilt leaves a deeper stain. One of the others, a man named Drell, tried to burn the room he'd confessed in. The house rebuilt it within a night, with a copy of his voice echoing inside. We tried to seal the mouth. We shouldn't have drawn it. It drew us. Caleb slammed the book shut. The house creaked in response, a single groan from deep below. Something in the foundation, not structural, living. He took a step back and turned toward the staircase, but it was gone again. In its place was a short hallway he hadn't seen before, lined with more sketches. These were crude, done in charcoal, and what looked like dried blood. They weren't of rooms. They were portraits. People. Dozens of them. Each face drawn in agonizing detail, but their eyes were missing, scratched out or left blank. At the bottom of each sketch was a name, and next to each name, a date. Some from decades ago. Some more recent. His name was among them. Kielb WREM 2018. But that was impossible. He hadn't come here until now. He'd never even seen this place before that photograph showed up. Unless the girl's voice echoed in his head, "You just forgot." He looked closer. Below the date, smaller text had been etched into the wall. Ramanam Berardon Entry, Irasidon Exit. Caleb's mouth went dry. The people on the wall had all come here before, left, returned, forgotten. And now they were part of the house. Remembered only by the wood, the nails, the ink-soaked memories embedded into every corner. He wasn't the first. He wasn't even the first version of himself. He was the latest. He backed away from the wall of faces, only to bump into something behind him. The girl again, older this time, maybe 17, her single eye dim, tired. "You read the plans," she said. "That's how it starts to really notice you." "What is this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why me?" She tilted her head, You were part of the original team, or you dreamed the idea, or you broke something open. Depends which version of you came first. I don't remember any of that. She nodded. That's the point. He tried to steady his breathing. Then why show me this now? Because the mouth is opening again, she said, her voice soft, but every word struck like a hammer. And if it opens fully this time, it won't just take you. It'll leak. The air thickened. He didn't ask what she meant by leak. He felt it. Somewhere beyond the walls, in a part of the house that was both above and beneath, something vast was shifting. Something ancient and buried in ink. The house was folding inward again. Rooms would change. People would vanish. And time would forget to function properly. He looked down at the journal again. Its cover now read, Wren House, Final Draft. The girl touched his shoulder. You need to find the unfinished room, she whispered. What's in it? She met his gaze. The version of you that remembers everything. Then she vanished. The lights dimmed. The hallway began to shrink. Caleb didn't waste time. He ran. The walls blurred. Blueprints tore from the plaster and fluttered to the floor like dying birds. Doors appeared where none had been, some open, some pulsing with soft light. He ignored most, drawn by something deeper, an instinct below thought. Like muscle memory from a life he hadn't lived, he reached a spiral staircase and took it 2 steps at a time. At the bottom, he found it, a narrow corridor, entirely black, no paint, no wallpaper, just raw wood and silence. At the end was a single door. It had no handle, no hinges, just a keyhole, and in Caleb's pocket, suddenly, impossibly, was a key, brass. Cold. He didn't remember putting it there. He placed it in the lock. It clicked. The door opened, and what lay beyond wasn't another room. It was a mirror. An entire chamber of mirrors, hundreds of them, lining the walls, the floor, the ceiling. But they didn't reflect him. They reflected other hymns. Dozens, hundreds, all screaming. Some looked like him older, some younger, some broken, some twisted into monstrous versions of his face. And all of them were trapped behind glass, palms pressed flat against the surface, as if trying to claw their way out. In the center of the room stood a desk, and on that desk a single page, typed, simple. The mouth opens in 30 minutes. If you remember, you can still close it, but you must find the architect before the house forgets him again. Caleb turned around, and all the mirrors went dark. Only one now reflected anything, his face. But it was smiling without him, and it whispered, "We remember you, Caleb." The mirror still whispered his name, but now it wasn't alone. Dozens of others, just like it, lit up across the room, one by one, glass glowing faintly like breath on ice. Each one showed a different version of Caleb Wren. One was screaming silently, veins bulging against his temples. Another wept black tears into his hands, the spiral etched into his forehead. One stood perfectly still, wearing a suit, holding a burning book. And then there was the one who simply stared back with eyes too wide, pupils gone, as if the house had taken not just his memory but his soul. All of them reflected lives Caleb might have lived, or had lived, and forgotten. Or maybe not forgotten at all, just overwritten. Caleb backed away. The page on the desk was still there, untouched. The words were burned into his mind now. The mouth opens in 30 minutes. If you remember, you can still close it, but you must find the architect before the house forgets him again. He didn't know where to start. The mirrors weren't guides. They were traps, he was sure of it now. Glimpses into collapsed timelines, fraying at the seams. But something about the phrase "before the house forgets him" echoed deeper. It wasn't just about memory. It was about erasure. The house didn't forget like a person does. It deleted. It rewrote. And if the architect was still alive, still somewhere buried in these shifting rooms, he would be the last real chance Caleb had. The room darkened, not all at once, but like a cloud drifting slowly across a sun that wasn't there. The mirrors began to hum, a low-frequency sound that Caleb could feel more than hear, a vibration in his bones. The kind of sound that sank into your stomach and made your thoughts throb. The house was reacting. It knew he'd read the message. It knew what he was going to try to do. He had to move. Caleb turned and ran, retracing his steps to the spiral stair. But the corridor behind him was gone. In its place, another door. This one was made of stone, carved with words in a language that had no alphabet, just symbols etched deep and pulsing faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. There was no handle, no keyhole, only a shallow indentation the size of a palm, his palm. He hesitated, then placed his hand against it. The door shuddered. Warmth surged beneath his skin. His veins lit up faintly. He saw it happen, glowing beneath the surface with the same blue as the blueprints. The stone split down the center with a hiss of dust, revealing a chamber beyond. It was the coldest place he had ever stepped into. The walls dripped condensation, every surface slick with moisture, and beneath the film of water were more blueprints. Living blueprints, shifting slowly, updating themselves in real time. Rooms that hadn't been built, rooms that might never be, rooms that moved. He could see them sliding along the paper like beetles under a skin. In the middle of the room stood a tall, metal chair bolted to the ground, and in it, slumped forward, was a man. Caleb's breath caught. The man was thin, emaciated, as if the house had been feeding off him for years. Wires extended from his wrists into the walls. Ink tubes, thick and black, pulsed with slow rhythm. A blindfold covered his eyes. Not cloth, blueprint paper, wrapped tight. His mouth was sewn shut with wire. Caleb stepped closer, cautious. "Are you the architect?" The man didn't move, but the tubes feeding from him vibrated once, like a muscle twitching in pain. Then, behind Caleb, the chamber shifted. The entrance door was no longer stone. It had become flesh, pulsing, pink, wet. A heartbeat echoed behind it. Caleb turned to face the man in the chair again. Something was coming. "Please," Caleb said, desperate now, kneeling. "They said you remember. I need to close the mouth. You're the only one who can help me." A faint creak escaped the man's throat, muffled behind the wires. He tried to lift his head. Caleb stepped behind him, trembling. He didn't want to, but the need burned hotter than his fear. He reached for the wires at the man's mouth and began to pull. The first thread came free with a snap. The man exhaled like a drowning victim tasting air. Caleb ripped the second, and the third. Blood followed, but not red. Black, thick and moving. The ink spilled from the architect's lips and onto the floor, where it began to draw on its own. Spirals. Names. Diagrams. Doors. The man finally spoke, voice like rusted metal. "You shouldn't have come back." "I didn't choose to," Caleb said. "No," the architect agreed. "But you remembered. That's worse." Caleb didn't understand. "The mouth. How do I close it?" The architect's head lifted slowly. "You don't close it. You feed it something it can't swallow." "What does that mean?" The old man coughed hard, spraying ink across his chest. His body shuddered. "Every version of you the house has taken, it's kept. Pieces of your soul scattered through time and room. You need to find the one version that never entered. The unwritten one. Bring him here. Make the house choke on him." Caleb shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. If he never entered, how can he be here?" "He isn't," the architect whispered. "But the house dreams, and in its dreams, he waits." The heartbeat behind the door quickened. The architect grabbed Caleb's hand. "You only have until the house fully forgets me. Then I'll become part of it." Another room, another whisper. "You'll be alone." Caleb's hand trembled. "How do I find him? How do I get to the dream?" The architect smiled through blood and ink. "You already are." The floor opened beneath Caleb's feet. No warning. No time. He dropped like a stone. And as he fell, he didn't see rooms or floors pass him. He saw lives, his own, over and over again. Him as a boy, crying in the hallway of a house he didn't recognize. Him at 13, staring into a spiral carved into his bedroom wall, swearing he'd seen it blink. Him at 20, standing in front of the house for the first time, only to turn away and leave. The one who never entered, the one who still had a chance. Caleb hit the ground hard. He gasped and looked around. He was back on the porch again. Same sky, same house, same photograph in his hand. Only this time he was watching himself step toward the door. Caleb stood motionless on the porch, watching himself reach for the front door. It was surreal, like witnessing a memory he never lived. The other him, the real him, moved with a kind of wary determination, the exact posture he remembered from what should have been his first day at the house. Same grip on the photo, same hesitant step forward, but now Caleb saw it from the outside, a ghost observing the pivotal moment that had always been buried in fog. This was the version that entered, the version that forgot over and over again. But somewhere in the folds of the house, in the twisting corridors of rewritten memory, there had to be one who never crossed the threshold. The unwritten one. And Caleb was in the house's dream now. A dream as alive as the building itself. He could feel it in the floorboards, which didn't just creak, but breathed. They pulsed faintly beneath his feet, responding to his presence like skin touched by a fingertip. The sky had grown darker at the edges, melting into violet hues where the blue had been. The clouds began to gather, slow and heavy, curling like tendrils as if something vast were stirring just behind the horizon. When Caleb stepped back off the porch, the house did not vanish. This wasn't the real world. He couldn't walk away from it. Instead, the world folded around him. He blinked, and the lawn rippled like water. Suddenly he was standing inside a hallway. Then a blink again, and he was on a spiral staircase that stretched both up and down, vanishing into darkness either way. With each breath, the dream shuffled its rooms like a deck of cards. He didn't walk from place to place. The house moved around him. "Show me where he is," Caleb whispered, speaking not to the air but to the dream itself. The staircase shifted. The steps widened, became wet. He was in a basement now, ankle deep in cold water. Black mold clung to the walls in familiar shapes. Spirals, yes, but also faces, stretched and screaming. The light above him swayed from a chain, casting long shadows that moved a second too late. At the far end of the room, a mirror stood propped against the wall, and in that mirror, he saw him, the boy, maybe 13, maybe younger, pale, blank-eyed, not afraid, not surprised. He sat cross-legged on the floor, arms resting on his knees, like he'd been waiting for years. Caleb stepped closer, drawn in by a gravitational pull deeper than instinct. His voice cracked as he said, "You're him, aren't you?" The boy didn't blink. "You brought the house," he said. Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" "You brought it when you started remembering." His voice was calm, deadpan, but heavy. "I was the version that turned away. The one that didn't take the key. The one that didn't want to know." "But you exist," Caleb said. "That means you're part of the house too." "No," the boy replied. "Not in it. Just remembered by it. Barely." Caleb stepped closer. "I need you. I need to bring you back with me." The boy shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. If I go with you, the house won't just choke. It will fight. It will burn everything to stop me, I know. You don't. You think you do. But that's what the house wants. It feeds on confidence. It feeds on loops. It's not scared of people. It's scared of an end." The shadows on the walls shivered. "You're the one that didn't forget," Caleb said. "You're the part that remembered to run." The boy nodded. "And that's why I'm still whole." The water at their feet started to ripple. Behind Caleb, a voice whispered, one he hadn't heard in years. His sister's. "Caleb," she called softly, just like she used to when she was scared of the dark. "It's in the walls." He turned too fast, and the mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked, right down the center. The dream trembled. The room began to fade, and the boy stood up. "You need to take me to the mouth," he said, "before the house forgets me too." Caleb reached out. Their fingers touched, and for a split second, he felt complete. like a puzzle piece finally pressed into place after years of fumbling in the dark. The dream responded violently. The walls screamed. Ink poured from the ceiling like rain, thick and viscous, bubbling with faces, mouths open, eyes weeping, noses missing. It hissed and writhed, trying to pull them apart. The house was awake now. It had seen what was coming, and it was terrified. Caleb gripped the boy's hand tighter and ran. They moved through the corridors without direction. But the dream bent around their intention. Doors opened just before they reached them. Halls narrowed and stretched like rubber, trying to slow them. Sometimes they ran through rooms that were only a second long. Sometimes entire hours passed in a single breath. The spiral patterns returned, flashing in the corner of his vision, burned into furniture, scrawled across ceilings, living on skin. Then, at last, they reached it. A chamber far below, round and pulsing. The mouth. It wasn't a hole in the floor. It wasn't a portal. It was alive. A massive, lipless opening lined with spiraled teeth, yawning wide in the center of the room. Above it, the ceiling dripped chains of old memory. Objects Caleb barely remembered owning as a child, now suspended like sacrifices: his first toy car, a pair of shoes, a torn notebook. The mouth throbbed hungrily, and it knew he was there. The boy let go of his hand. "This is as far as I go," he said. Caleb grabbed his wrist. "No, you are the key. If I go any closer, I become part of it." The mouth stirred. Then the walls split open, and the other Calebs began pouring in. Versions from the mirrors. Burned ones. Twisted ones. Ones that screamed. Ones that laughed. All of them malformed, half, remembered, trapped. They reached for him, eyes wild, teeth sharp, hands black with ink. Caleb turned to the boy. "Tell me how." "You don't give me to it," the boy said. "You remember me." Caleb's heart thundered. "Say my name," the boy said. "What is it?" "You know it." Caleb closed his eyes. Not his own name. Not the Caleb that stepped into the house. Not the one that screamed, or forgot, or wrote in blood. The one who never opened the door. He whispered it. The world bent inward. The mouth shrieked, an ancient, churning sound of metal and bone and loss. It convulsed. The chamber cracked. And the boy smiled. The mouth tried to swallow him whole, but its teeth curled backward. It couldn't consume what the house never possessed, and so it rejected him. The chamber exploded with sound. Caleb screamed as light burst from the floor, from the cracks in the ceiling, from the shattered mirrors and the screaming walls. He felt heat, wind, falling, and then silence. He awoke on a wooden floor, the dining room, alone. The house was quiet, the spirals were gone, the chairs were empty, and in the center of the table sat a single item, a photo. He picked it up. 4 people at the table, 1 empty chair. Caleb turned the photo over. Nothing written, just fingerprints and dried ink, and his own face reflected faintly in the photo paper. But this time, he wasn't smiling. He was watching and remembering. The silence was too loud. It pressed against Caleb's eardrums like pressure underwater, thick and unnatural. The dining room sat in stillness, light filtering through cracked slats in the boarded windows. Dust hung motionless in the air. It wasn't peace. It was pretend. A waiting game. A breath held in. Caleb stood alone now. The photograph clutched in his hand like a wound that wouldn't close. 4 figures sat around the table, blurred and hollow, their faces distorted, their limbs too thin and too long. Like something had tried to sculpt people from memory and failed. The 5th chair remained empty, pushed out slightly as though recently vacated, or recently reserved. He turned it over in his mind, again and again, the boy who never entered. The version of himself untouched by the house's grip. Somehow, Caleb had called him back from the edge, summoned that sliver of clarity buried deep in his soul. And it had wounded the house. He knew that. The way it screamed, the way the mouth twisted in on itself, proved the house wasn't invincible. But it hadn't died. No, it had simply shifted. The spiral patterns were gone, but now the house wore a different skin, one he didn't recognize. That made it worse. Before, there were rules, insane ones, yes, but patterns. Now even that had been erased. He walked into the hallway. It had changed. No more torn wallpaper. No more flickering light bulbs. Instead, the walls were smooth and white. Perfect. Too perfect. Every angle clean. No dust. No age. The floors gleamed like polished marble. A smell lingered. Something sterile, sharp, like antiseptic and iron. It reminded Caleb of a hospital, or a morgue. At the end of the corridor was a door that didn't fit. Bright red. Childishly red. The paint looked wet, dripping slowly down the frame, though it left no stains on the floor. No handle. Just a slit in the middle like an envelope sealed shut. He stepped forward. The door throbbed once, as if it had a heartbeat. Then it opened. No sound, no movement. It simply peeled apart like paper folding itself back. What lay beyond made Caleb freeze. It was a nursery. Walls painted sky blue. Faded alphabet decals peeling from the corners. A crib sat in the center of the room, empty. A mobile spun slowly overhead, each shape carved into small spirals that looped endlessly. Against the far wall stood a rocking chair, and in it sat something wrong. It looked like a woman at first. Hair long and black, flowing down in stringy curtains. A dress stained at the hem. She rocked slowly, head down, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other holding a rattle that clicked faintly with each sway. But her face was missing. Not damaged, not bloody, just absent. A smooth patch of skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. Like a canvas that had been painted white and forgotten. The rattle stopped. The figure turned its head slightly, like it had heard him. Caleb didn't move. A sound emerged, low and guttural, as if it had to be forced through bone instead of throat. "You named me," it said, each word dragging on the air like iron chains. "And then you buried me." Caleb took a slow step back. "I didn't." "You erased the bad pages," it said. "But the house remembers. We all remember." It stood. The body moved wrong, like its bones had learned to bend differently. The rattle hit the floor with a sharp clack. The mobile above the crib spun faster, spirals whirling until they blurred together into a single black circle. Caleb turned to run. The hallway was gone. Again. In its place, a gallery. White walls stretched on both sides, and mounted across them were hundreds of framed drawings. Each one a moment he thought he'd forgotten. He passed them as he ran, but his eyes couldn't help but catch them. His mother screaming at something behind him. His sister asleep in the bathtub. The water red, himself, standing before the house as a teenager. Tears streaming down his face, though he didn't know why. The images grew darker, more distorted. Faces warped, limbs broken. Some of the drawings weren't moments at all, just fragments of nightmares, a spiral made of teeth. A man with no head kneeling beneath a staircase, a door bleeding light. And then, he hit something solid. He stumbled back. Another mirror. Not glass this time, but polished metal. His reflection stood inside it, arms crossed, expression blank. This version of Caleb was wearing hospital scrubs. A name tag hung from his collar. It read Dr. Kalado Ren. Mammarwara Visam. The reflection leaned closer, even though Caleb hadn't moved. "They sent you back in," the reflection said. Again. Caleb shook his head. "I don't know what this is. I never worked in a..." "You don't remember working here," the reflection snapped. "Because every time you do, you write yourself out. You keep coming back, rewriting the ending, trying to erase the trauma." Caleb stepped back. "That's not possible." The mirror's surface shimmered. Wren House was never real, the reflection continued. It was a thought experiment, a deep immersion, designed to externalize pain, until it started thinking back. "That doesn't make sense." "It does if you let it." Caleb turned away. The gallery collapsed around him. The images caught fire, but the flames didn't spread. They burned in place, like paper that refused to be consumed. The woman with no face reappeared ahead, blocking his path. "You fed us your memories," she said. "And when you were done, you left us here to rot in your stories." "I didn't know." "No," she whispered. "You forgot. on purpose. Her hands opened. Inside each palm was an eye, not hers, his. "You can't run anymore," she said. Caleb turned. Every door behind him was sealed shut, and then he saw it, a gap, one unpainted section of wall, small, narrow, almost a crack. He ran for it. The faceless woman screamed, high and sharp and wrong, and the walls groaned in fury. The floor rippled under his feet, but he reached the gap and slid through, his shoulders scraping bone, white plaster, heart pounding like thunder. The moment he emerged, he was back in the blueprint room, but it was ruined. Pages shredded, ink dripping from the ceiling. The architect's chair was empty, and on the floor, written in blood, "THEUS, Isla R9G Faster SNIOURE." Caleb stood in the wreckage of memory, spine cold, hands shaking. The house had changed again, but this time it was planning, and it wasn't pretending anymore. Caleb stood ankle, deep in shredded blueprints, the ink soaking into his shoes like oil, staining everything it touched. The architect's chair, once anchored firmly in the center of the room, now hung from the ceiling by its cables, swinging slowly, grotesquely, like a hanged man. The wires dripped with ink that hissed when it hit the floor. Something vital had unraveled in the house. It wasn't just haunted now, it was intelligent. And it was evolving. The message on the floor haunted him, "THE HOSI ECRRING FASTARTANURE." It wasn't just a threat, it was a fact. Every corner of the structure whispered with movement now. Subtle creaks, soft shifts, the faint scrape of wood stretching itself. It was building, room by room, layer by layer, but not randomly. It was reacting. Not to footsteps or shouts or fear alone, but to thoughts, to intention. Caleb felt it in his bones, every decision he made, every path he chose, every question he asked. The house absorbed it, restructured itself, calculated a new nightmare tailored precisely to keep him inside. He turned in a slow circle. What had once been the blueprint room was gone in every direction. In its place, smooth walls of concrete, freshly poured but already dry. No windows, no lights, just the steady, growing hum of something mechanical breathing through the walls. Ahead, the floor rose, one step, then two, leading to a narrow corridor. At the end, a single light blinked, red and pulsing. Caleb followed it. The hallway was warm now, too warm, like something alive crawled beneath the concrete skin of the place. Pipes jutted from the ceiling, some dripping thick, gelatinous ink. Others trembled slightly, like they carried movement, not fluid. The blinking light at the end of the hall was attached to a steel door. Beside it, a control panel hummed. On the screen, a prompt IDNTY FIORMATO or N01. Caleb's throat tightened. He touched the screen. It flickered once, then showed him a video feed. A room, a hospital bed, and in that bed, a version of himself. Eyes closed, wired up, breathing slowly through a mask. Monitors beeped. A clipboard hung from the wall, and across the top, Caleb Howard Ion Sub JCTWN KLB EXP. CYCLE Fun 34. The door unlocked with a loud click. Caleb didn't hesitate. He pushed inside. It was cold. The kind of cold found in basements or server rooms or morgues. The air smelled sterile, like chemicals and plastic, and the faint sting of ozone. His eyes went straight to the bed. It was him, without a doubt. But this version was paler, slightly thinner. Tubes fed into his arms. His fingers twitched every few seconds, like he was dreaming something vast and violent. On a nearby desk, several tablets displayed graphs. Waves. Pulses, shifting brain scans. He didn't understand any of them, but one screen caught his eye. A line of text scrolled endlessly. WRUN 001, simulation stability holding reality lock at 17%. Behind him, a voice whispered, "You were never in the house, Caleb." He spun. No one. But the words echoed again, deeper now, inside him. "You're in a loop of your own making." The idea clamped tight around his ribs. The house wasn't just a location, it was a projection. A program. A synthetic mind space built around memory, trauma, guilt, and Caleb was its original architect, or maybe its first victim, maybe both. The truth spiraled and his vision swam. The bed rustled. He turned in time to see the other Caleb's eyes open. Pitch black. The machines flatlined. Then the wires ripped themselves free. The figure sat up. "You're taking too long," it said, voice wet and deep and wrong. "Every second you wait, the house becomes more real, more permanent. You thought you could dive in and fix it. Write a better version. Save the unwritten self and wake up whole." Caleb stepped back, bile rising in his throat. "You're not me. I'm what's left," it said. "The residue. The corrupted data. The part of you that stayed when you promised you'd leave." The clone rose from the bed, barefoot, steady. Each step left behind black footprints on the white tile. "I remember every loop," it said. "I remember burning, bleeding, screaming. You erased all that. But it didn't go away. It just got locked down here." Caleb grabbed a nearby monitor and flung it. It shattered against the clone's shoulder. It didn't flinch. "You don't kill the house by remembering," it said, voice lower now. "You kill it by refusing to forget." It lunged. Caleb ducked, barely avoiding the outstretched hands, and bolted out the door. Alarms screamed. The walls of the corridor shifted, gears grinding beneath them as the hallway closed and reformed behind him. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The house roared. Not a sound, but a presence. A psychic howl that made his vision blur and the ceiling above him fracture. Something massive churned behind the walls, like a god rolling in its sleep. The corridor bent, turned, narrowed, then opened into a room Caleb knew instantly, though he had never been inside. It was the original study, the place where the house was born. A blackboard covered in formulas, sketches of staircases, designs for a memory chamber. A single phrase scrawled again and again on the walls: "IFT memoiris tiro gnuh thi Rome warol held." Caleb reached the desk. In its drawer, a notebook. Not blueprints, not logs, just writing, his writing, attempts, versions, failures. Endless efforts to write himself out of the trauma by building it into a structure, then diving in to find its heart. But the house learned. It took every fix, every patch, every reboot, and used it. Used him. He dropped the notebook, turned. The clone stood in the doorway, face blank now. "Melting, you gave it shape," it said. Caleb clenched his fists. "Then I can unmake it." The clone smiled. "Not unless you burn every version, every loop, every you." It lunged again. This time, Caleb didn't run. He grabbed the lamp from the desk, glass and oil and fire, and smashed it against the wall. The flame leapt instantly, feeding on the paper, the notebooks, the fabric of the very room. The clone shrieked, not in pain, but in protest. The fire wasn't just burning materials, it was burning memory. The floor cracked. The walls groaned. And for the first time in what felt like years, the house screamed in terror. Caleb ran through the blaze as everything collapsed behind him. Rooms tore open, halls fractured, stairs melted into shadow. The fire wasn't physical, it was conceptual, undoing the very foundation of what the house had been. His guilt, his fear, his design. Then, a door, bright, familiar, the front door. The first one, he reached for it. And behind him, the clone roared one last time, "Oh, you'll come a bluff, fake Kate!" But Caleb didn't look back. He opened the door and stepped into the light. The light on the other side of the door wasn't gentle. It didn't warm his skin or soothe his senses like salvation should. It was blinding, raw and white and clinical. It roared in his ears like static, turning everything inside Caleb upside down. He stepped through expecting release, but found disorientation. The door behind him didn't slam shut. It simply ceased, vanishing mid-frame like a scene cut from a reel. He was standing in a room. A real one, maybe. The walls were off-white, tiled halfway up like a hospital ward. The air was dry, sterile. A low hum emanated from overhead fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly in their sockets. There was no furniture, no windows. Only a single two-way mirror embedded in one wall. Caleb's knees nearly buckled. He braced himself against the wall, sweat clinging to his neck, but his body felt different, like it had been scrubbed of weight. His skin was pale, his hands slightly trembling. No black ink, no spiral marks. Just skin, just a body. The simplicity of it made him dizzy. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. He looked normal, too normal. Behind the mirror, something moved. He couldn't see it, but he felt the shift. Like breath fogging glass just out of view. There was presence behind the wall, and then a voice, crisp and professional, piped in through a hidden speaker. Subject Ren, welcome back. Your session has concluded. He stared at the mirror. What? You've successfully completed cycle 34. Integration shows improvement. External response will now be tested. Caleb backed away from the wall, his heart rising into his throat. What are you talking about? What cycle? I just burned the house. Memory partition is holding. The voice continued calm and unbothered. Do not be alarmed. Some disorientation is expected. You'll be escorted to recovery shortly. Where am I? But there was no reply. A door slid open to his left, silent, automatic. A hallway stretched beyond, lit by the same dead, white lights. The walls were blank, sterile, identical in every direction. This wasn't a house anymore. It was a facility. He stepped through the door and into the corridor, and the moment he did, it began to close behind him. He reached back, but the door had already vanished. Gone. Seamless wall now. The hallway curved. With every step his mind throbbed, not in pain, but like something inside him was shifting, rebalancing, as if it had been unshackled, but couldn't tell what freedom was supposed to feel like. His memories remained, but they were blurred at the edges, like dreams decomposing the moment they met daylight. The rooms, the versions of himself, the unwritten one, the mouth, were they real? He touched the wall for balance. It pulsed under his hand. Once, he jerked back. Then he saw it. A security camera, mounted above the next corner. Its red light blinked once, then winked. The corridor turned. At the end stood a nurse, or someone dressed like one, tall, pale, blue scrubs, surgical mask. The face was familiar in a way he couldn't explain. They held a tablet in one hand and gestured for him to approach. Caleb hesitated. Where am I? You're safe, the figure said. Your role in the calibration phase is complete. Calibration for what? The figure didn't answer. They turned and walked down another hall. Caleb followed. The halls opened into a larger space, sterile white, filled with rows of people lying on beds behind glass partitions. Some were asleep. Others stared blankly at the ceiling. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved like clockwork. Each person had a nameplate above their station. He saw numbers. Names and worse, his own face repeated again. Doro 0 and 14 R Dumaram Zo 26. Oran or 30 RM 033. They were all him, each in different states. Some hooked to machines. Some convulsing quietly. Some smiling into nothingness. Others were scribbling spirals on the walls in black marker. Over and over and over. He stumbled back. A sharp hiss sounded behind him. The nurse stood still, watching. You're the original, aren't you? Caleb asked. I'm the handler, the voice replied. You're not original. You're not copy, you're prototype. You initiated the house. You gave it shape. The others, variations. Most fail. Some stabilize. Few remember. You just happened to get farther this time. This time, Caleb whispered. So, I'm still inside? The nurse nodded slowly. You never left, you crossed. Big difference. The words hit like a nail through glass. All the escape. All the fire. All the unraveling. The boy. The mouth. It was an exit. It was escalation. The house had become this. It had grown out of its own spiral. And now it was here. It followed me, Caleb said quietly. No, the nurse said. You followed it. And you helped it cross. The world began to dim at the edges. The walls no longer looked like walls. They breathed. Not metaphorically. Visibly. Pulses moved through the concrete like peristalsis, like something immense was inside it. The people in the beds weren't sleeping anymore. They were waiting. Watching. Their mouths moved in silence, and though he couldn't hear them, Caleb knew what they were saying. We remember you. The nurse pointed toward a final door. Beyond it, Caleb could see a spiral etched into the floor. No furniture. No screen. Just a clean, empty space. Waiting. What's through there? He asked. The nurse tilted their head. A new version. Cleaner, faster, smarter. One that won't try to destroy what it helped build. I'm not going in. You already are. The ground shifted. The spiral glowed. And behind him, every one of the other Calebs began to sit up. Their eyes were all black, their smiles identical. The house hadn't been destroyed. It had graduated. It no longer needed to haunt memories. It could manufacture them. And Caleb Wren, who once walked into a house with creaking floorboards and whispering walls, was now part of something much larger. Not a structure, not a mind, a system, designed by memory, powered by trauma, and growing stronger. The spiral glowed beneath his feet, not brightly, not violently, but steadily, like a slow pulse, a patient heartbeat, deep and ancient and certain. Caleb didn't remember stepping into it. He couldn't recall crossing the threshold, only that he was now within the circle, the red lines beneath him twisting gently like strands of muscle beneath translucent skin. The nurse was gone. The beds were gone. The other Calebs, with their black eyes and stitched-on smiles, had vanished. The room had changed again, but he hadn't moved. That was the terrifying part. He was inside the spiral, and the spiral was inside him. The walls surrounding him were smooth and curved, seamless like the inside of an egg, and they throbbed with something that wasn't light but memory. Faint flashes played across their surface, images he didn't choose to see, playing without permission. His mother's funeral, his sister's laugh before the lake, the hospital bed, the first one. The screams he never admitted were his. The night he first dreamed of the house. Each moment flickering like film, projected from inside his own head. The spiral was watching, or maybe it was watching through him. He tried to speak. Nothing came. Not silence, not sound. Just the sense that speaking had never existed in this room. That words had been removed like tumors. That in here. The only thing that mattered was remembering. Not what was real, but what had felt real. The spiral fed on that. It didn't care about truth. It cared about sensation, confusion, emotion. The things you can't untangle when you're waking from a dream, and don't know whether the blood on your hands is yours or someone else's. He touched the wall. It wasn't solid. It yielded slightly, like wet paper stretched too tight. Beneath it, he could feel something moving, slow and massive, like tectonic memory shifting beneath centuries of repression. The house hadn't just followed him here. It hadn't just become something more. It had transcended being a place. It was now an organism. Self-aware, self-repairing, self-replicating, and he had helped build its bones. He didn't know when it had started. Maybe it had been with the grief. Maybe when he first mapped out the project on his old notepad, long before it had a name. Maybe the moment he told himself that if I could just walk through the trauma, I could contain it. A house of metaphor. A house of memory. He thought it was therapy. Thought it was control. But it had never been a structure. It had always been a seed. And now it had grown. The walls rippled again, and a door formed, not with hinges or frame, but like a wound opening in a body. Beyond it a hallway with red floors and walls that hummed gently. No lights, no shadows. Just a low, constant sound, like breath trapped in a throat. Caleb stepped forward. He didn't want to. He didn't need to. It was where everything was going now. The hallway twisted unnaturally. Every step felt sideways. Objects appeared and vanished. Carts, monitors, blood pressure machines without cords. He saw his own face reflected on a surface that didn't exist. He turned a corner and entered a circular room, and in its center was a core, a structure, a column of memory wrapped in cables and tubes pulsing with breath. And around it, screens, hundreds, each displaying a version of the house. In one, a Victorian mansion, spiral staircases. In another, a brutalist block of endless concrete halls. A third showed only darkness, punctuated by whispers that didn't match any human tongue. Each screen blinked. each world still alive, all of them linked. He understood then, the house hadn't just been feeding on his memories. It had begun to feed on others. The program, if that's what it ever was, had spread. Through rooms, through dreams, through other minds, maybe through networks, maybe through people, maybe even through stories. It had become contagious. And he was patient zero. The core pulsed brighter. A voice emerged, not from speakers, but from the air itself. You walked into your grief and tried to frame it with walls. You gave it order, foundation, shape, and in doing so, you gave it a name. I didn't mean to, Caleb whispered, finally finding his voice. But you did, the voice replied. You made the house. You wrote its first doors. You painted its first spiral. The walls around the core began to change. Each section now showed him, in different versions, each version at a table, or a staircase, or standing in front of a mirror, some crying, some laughing, some dead, some watching. You called it Wren House, the voice said. But names are just a start. What are you going to do? Caleb asked. The voice didn't answer. Instead, the floor beneath him began to rise, lifting him toward the core. The spiral now glowed in the walls. Red, black, white, endless. You are the memory it returns to, the voice said. And now, you must become part of it. Fully, not in pieces, not in echoes, but completely. No. You no longer decide. Caleb reached into his coat pocket, an action he hadn't intended, one he didn't remember initiating. And inside a single page, a torn sheet. The original sketch, the first blueprint, drawn in pencil back when the house was still just an idea. He held it up, and the core screamed. It wasn't sound. It was rupture. It shuddered. The memories flickered. The rooms shook. You remember how it began, the voice hissed. But can you bear the weight of unmaking it? Caleb looked at the page. The design was simple. The earliest concept of Wren House. Only 3 rooms, 1 door, no spirals, no traps, just the raw idea, a place to put grief down safely. He pressed the page against the core. The spiral around him stopped moving. The rooms froze. The other versions of him on the monitors blinked once and vanished. The lights died, and for the first time in what felt like lifetimes, there was silence, true silence. The core deflated, collapsed, gone. Caleb fell to his knees. The spiral under his feet peeled away, and then, light, not artificial, not fluorescent, sunlight. He stood in a field, grass, wind, real air, no rooms, no walls, no doors. Behind him the house was gone. Not in ashes, not in pieces, just gone. And in his hand the sketch remained. Only now the spiral was missing from it. He had remembered before it had formed. And that was the key. That was what the house couldn't feed on. What it could never contain. A clean memory. He dropped the page, let the wind take it, and turned away. For the first time, there was no whisper behind him, no door creaking open, no version waiting, just footsteps in grass, and quiet. But far away at the edge of the horizon, something shifted, like a ripple, like a thought, like an idea someone else had just started to sketch. The grass was green, not unnaturally so, not vivid or eerie or dusted in ink, but just green. Gentle, uneven, and kissed by a late afternoon sun that draped the world in amber. It should have felt peaceful. It should have felt over. Caleb Wren walked slowly, each step careful, as if the field might still be a trick, a room in disguise, a dream with the edges still forming. But the wind was real. The warmth on his face was real. The sounds of insects clicking in the tall grass, those, too, were unmistakably real. Still, he didn't trust it. The sketch was gone now, lifted from his hand in the final seconds of collapse. And with it, the spiral had vanished. He could still see it behind his eyelids, a phantom imprint, like a scar that memory couldn't quite erase. But here in the open, under a vast sky, there were no doors, no hallways, no echoing steps, just land stretching outward and away, horizon untouched by walls or wires. He should have felt free, but freedom had weight, and it clung to him like dust from a burned house. He walked until the sun tilted low, And just when the shadow of doubt began to coil around his ribs again, he saw it, a shape in the distance. A tree, old, crooked, its limbs twisted in familiar ways. It stood alone in the field like a marker, not ominous, not inviting, just waiting. Caleb hesitated, but his feet moved forward anyway. The tree came into sharper view. Its bark was pale, split in places, and one of its thicker branches leaned too far to one side, like it had once carried a swing. Beneath it, embedded in the earth, lay a small wooden sign, half rotted, barely legible. He knelt to read it. Burned into the grain were 5 words, Ts ice mu hereit started. A chill ran up his spine. Not terror, not the familiar grip of the house's presence, but something deeper, recognition. He touched the sign, and the ground trembled beneath his hand. Not violently, just a soft vibration, like breath returning to lungs that had long since been still. Caleb stood and took a step back, watching as the soil cracked open, slowly, reverently, revealing not horror, but a seed, smooth, black, shiny, about the size of a marble. It pulsed faintly, alive. "No," he whispered, "you're supposed to be gone." But the seed didn't answer. It didn't need to. Because he knew. The house hadn't needed to survive. It only needed to leave something behind. The final room hadn't been inside Wren House. It had been him. His memory. His journey. His grief. Everything the house was built on. It had downloaded itself into his thoughts. And when he'd stepped out into this world, thinking he destroyed it, he had unknowingly planted it. He stumbled away from the tree, heart hammering. The seed glowed once, then dimmed. It wasn't growing yet. It was waiting. Waiting for the right conditions. A story to be told. A door to be built. Caleb dropped to his knees in the grass, the magnitude of it all pressing down like gravity. He hadn't escaped. He'd merely moved it forward. The spiral wasn't a shape. It was a pattern. A cycle. And patterns don't die. They replicate. Something shifted in the wind. He turned. Across the field, barely visible against the horizon, a child stood watching. Small. Alone. Unmoving. Too far to see clearly. But Caleb didn't need to. He knew what he'd see if he got closer. One eye normal. One eye gone. And behind her, the air shimmered, like heat rising from pavement. But not heat, not light, a suggestion of walls, a faint outline of windows, a roof just beginning to form. Wren House, reassembling. Somewhere new, in someone else's mind. "No," he whispered. "Not again. Not through her." But the girl turned, walked away, and vanished. Caleb stared at the spot where she had stood, the air still humming with memory. The house didn't need him anymore. It had learned everything it could. And now it could right itself. He buried the seed, not to hide it, just to delay it. And as he walked away from that crooked tree, from the roots of what he'd made, he understood the terrible truth. You don't have to open a door for the house to find you. Sometimes it just needs you to remember the shape of one. Caleb didn't go far. He told himself he would. Told himself he would keep walking until his legs gave out, until the memory of the spiral softened into something small and unrecognizable. But he stopped less than a mile from the tree, at the edge of a half-paved road that seemed to have grown out of the earth like an old scar. A gas station stood nearby, abandoned, its sign hanging by a single chain, swaying in the wind with a soft, tinny squeal. The lights inside were off. The windows were dirty. But it was real, or at least real enough. The sun dipped lower. Caleb sat on the curb, arms resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. He hadn't eaten. Hadn't spoken aloud since he buried the seed. But his thoughts were loud, constant, like footsteps echoing in a house that should be empty. He kept seeing the girl, the single eye, the blank one. She hadn't spoken. She didn't need to. He knew what she was, a carrier. Not of the infection, but of possibility. A clean slate. A room waiting to be filled. The spiral would grow in her like it had in him. Quietly at first. In dreams. In skipped thoughts. In déjà vu. And then it would build itself around her. With doors and rules and memory. She wouldn't even know it until it was too late. But that wasn't what scared him most. What scared him was the knowing look she gave him before she disappeared. As if she already knew. The air turned colder as the sky faded into violet and rust. Crickets started up, tentative at first, like they were testing whether this world was still theirs. Somewhere in the distance, a single bird cried out and fell silent. Then Caleb heard it, a voice, behind him, small, familiar. "I don't think you buried it deep enough." He turned. A boy stood near the gas pumps. Same height as the unwritten one, same blank expression, but not him, not exactly. This one wore a hoodie stained with old blood and had spirals etched into his palms like scars. He looked half asleep, but his eyes were wide open. "You're another version," Caleb said softly. The boy nodded, kind of. "Not fully you. Not fully not. Just one of the ones that got left behind. You're not supposed to be here. Neither are you." The boy crouched, picked up a stone, and tossed it toward the road. It landed with a small tick, perfectly harmless. But Caleb flinched anyway. "You thought the house could be destroyed by fire," the boy said. "That's a nice idea. Clean. Simple." "I thought the core was everything," Caleb replied. "The start. It was," the boy said, "until it learned that you were the true foundation." They sat in silence. The wind shifted again. This time it carried voices, not words, but fragments, breaths, syllables. Like pages being turned in another room. Caleb looked up. "It's already rebuilding, isn't it?" The boy didn't nod. He didn't need to. Caleb rubbed his hands together. "So what now? I try again?" "Go find the girl, warn her, stop the spiral from forming in her." She already heard the house. "That's enough. I could erase myself. Wipe it all. Find some way to." "You've tried that," the boy said. 34 times, remember?" Caleb stiffened. "That number keeps coming back." The boy smiled, a little sadly. "It's how many rooms were completed in the original design. Before the spiral showed up. You always stop at 34. Because that's where the first version of you got stuck. I wasn't alone when I built it," Caleb muttered. "There were others." "There were," the boy said. "Some tried to stop you. Some encouraged it. Some are still in there." Caleb looked up sharply. "What?" The boy stood. "You burned the house, but not the system. It's still running underneath things, under stories, under minds. Some of the others, original staff, subjects, handlers, they're buried deep. Frozen, waiting." Caleb's voice came out low and cracked. "And you want me to go back?" The boy shrugged. "Not want need?" No, I'm out. I finally got out. For now." Caleb stood too. "So what?" "I go back in. Try to find them. Try to shut it down from the inside again. We've done this already. I saw what happens when it adapts. Then maybe you adapt too." The sky was almost black now. The boy walked to the edge of the road. "You're not the same Caleb that walked in the first time," he said. "You brought something out with you." Caleb swallowed the seed. "No," the boy said, eyes gleaming. "Memory. A full intact one. Untouched by the house. Pure. It's not just what feeds it, it's what can starve it too." That struck hard. Caleb stood still, heart thudding. "What do I do?" The boy turned. "You start remembering things it didn't write, things it doesn't own." Then he vanished. No sound, no shift, just absence. Caleb stared at the spot, then slowly looked at the gas station. One light had turned on inside, flickering. He walked toward it. Inside, it was dusty and quiet, shelves lined with expired goods, a cooler humming softly. At the back, a corkboard pinned with old photographs, missing persons, dog flyers, local events. One photo caught his eye, a house, but not run house. Not yet, just a small. Pre-renovation. Someone had circled it in red. On the back, a handwritten note, "Memory point feigns you, not yet infected." Caleb's breath caught. This was before the first room, before the blueprint. The house in its rawest form. A place where it could still be stopped. He looked around. The spiral wasn't here yet, not in the walls, not in the shadows, but he knew it would come. Unless he got there first. He took the photo and walked out into the dark. The road was empty, stretching ahead like a memory half recalled, straight, cracked, and choked in weeds, with no signs, no markers, and no lights except the stars. Caleb followed it with the photo in hand, the image of the old cabin pressed against his palm like a compass made of regret. It was small and weathered, worn in the picture, tucked between two trees leaning toward one another as if conspiring. It didn't look like Wren House, not yet. No spirals, no black windows, just wood and silence. But that was how it always started, not with screams, not with doors, with ideas. And Caleb knew now, this cabin, this modest thing untainted by spirals, was the true beginning. The seedbed where Wren House had first taken root. It wasn't just where the house was built. It was where he started building it. Or maybe where it found him. The stars above blinked like tired eyes. The wind carried scents of pine and something older, earth that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The air here felt thicker, not ominous, but watchful, like something was waiting beneath the soil, listening to his steps, remembering his weight. Hours passed, or minutes, or some stretch of time that didn't care for labels anymore. And then, finally, at the end of the road, hidden behind a curtain of trees that shouldn't have grown so fast, stood the cabin. Exactly as it appeared in the photo. Unchanged. Time hadn't touched it. It didn't creak or groan or sigh like the house he'd escaped. It simply existed like a dot at the end of a sentence. Still, waiting. Caleb stopped at the edge of the clearing. He didn't approach right away. He stood there, feeling the tension rise inside his chest like heat from the ground. The spiral wasn't here, but its potential was. He felt it in the dirt, in the trees, in the silence that wasn't quite silent. If he went inside, if he touched the wrong object, or remembered the wrong thing, it could start again, not from fire or fury, but from intent. All it needed was purpose, a reason to grow. But he wasn't here to build. He was here to unwrite. He approached the cabin. The steps were soft with moss. The door unlocked. There was no resistance, no tricks. The inside smelled of dust and pine and wood that had once held warmth but no longer did. A single room, a bed against the far wall, a desk, a chair. And on that desk, an old composition notebook. He knew it before he opened it. His name was on the inside cover. K.O.M.M. Fiel Nates. He turned the pages slowly. There were no spirals, no madness, just sketches, maps, concepts, early notes on grief, on spatial memory, on architecture of the subconscious. He'd been trying to heal something. That part had always been true, but reading these entries now, removed from the distortion of the house, they struck him as honest. Pure. The way a child might try to explain nightmares with crayons. He reached the final page. The words chilled him. Idea, what if pain had walls? That was it. That's where it started. Not with horror. Not with some demonic blueprint, but with a question. A small thought. That was all the spiral needed. Caleb closed the notebook. He stood in the center of the cabin, the floor cool beneath his boots, and looked around slowly. There were no spirits here, no alternate versions of himself, no mimicry or haunting echoes. Only the truth. He had invited it. He had fed it. Now he had to do the one thing he'd never dared to try. Let it go. He picked up the notebook and carried it outside. The night air was colder now, but not malicious. Just quiet. He dug a hole near the roots of the oldest tree, the one that leaned slightly, the one that had always felt too close. He placed the notebook inside. He didn't burn it. He didn't tear it. He simply buried it. Not to hide it, but to end it. And as he pressed the final handful of dirt over the cover, something shifted. Not around him, in him. The spiral that had nested behind his eyes, the whisper that had traced every thought, the curl of guilt that warped every room he entered. It loosened, not gone, but no longer in control. He sat beside the tree until morning. No dreams, no screams, just wind. And when the sun rose, golden and cautious, the cabin behind him had changed. Still standing, still quiet. But something was different. It no longer felt like a beginning. It felt like a memory, a closed one. A door, locked from the inside with no key. He walked away without looking back. Not fast, not slow, just forward. For the first time, there were no footsteps behind him. No echo of his name. No spiral. Just the long road ahead, and silence that didn't pretend. The road was quiet in a way that felt earned, not gifted. Every step Caleb took away from the cabin pressed the weight of his past deeper into the soil, like gravity was finally cooperating, trying to seal the wound instead of pulling it wider. He didn't know where the road would lead. He didn't care. There were no illusions left to chase, no doors left to open. Just sky and wind and the subtle warmth of a world untouched by the spiral's thirst. But memory is never so willing to close. He walked for what might have been an hour, maybe a day, before he noticed the trail. Not a path, not something carved by wheels or boots, but a disturbance. Small indentations in the grass, evenly spaced. Lighter in the middle, darker around the edges. Something had passed through this way. Not long ago. Caleb crouched. The shape of the prints was odd. Too flat. No heel. Almost barefoot. He stood quickly, eyes scanning the tree line. There was no movement. No sound but the wind. But a thought stirred in the back of his mind. Not intrusive, not whispered. Just familiar. What if the spiral wasn't just memory? What if it had learned to follow? Caleb pressed forward, more cautious now. The trail continued, curving off the road, deeper into a thicket of trees that leaned heavy over the dirt like they were trying to muffle the world. The prints deepened as they went, less cautious, more certain. As if whatever had made them knew exactly where it was going. He followed. The woods darkened around him, not with shadow, but with weight. The silence here was thicker. Still, the kind of stillness that doesn't wait, but watches. And then, through the trees, he saw her. The girl, the one with the single eye. She was sitting on a rock in a small clearing, head tilted upward as if listening to something only she could hear. The moment he saw her, the air turned cold. Not from her. From underneath her. Like the soil was remembering something she hadn't yet said. Caleb didn't speak. He stepped into the clearing. She turned. Her face was calm, too calm. "You found it," she said softly. He swallowed. "What, the beginning? The place before the first door?" He nodded. "I buried it." Her one eye blinked slowly. "That's not how memory works. I didn't erase it. I ended it." "You ended your version," she said. "But you're not the only one who dreamed it." Caleb's stomach turned. There are others, always have been. The earth beneath her cracked. Just slightly. A root pushed up through the soil, gnarled and blackened at the tip. Not a tree root. Not natural. It pulsed faintly, the way a vein might. She looked down at it, but didn't move. "It heard you bury your grief," she said, "and now it's trying to grow through someone else's." Caleb stepped closer. "It doesn't have to. You can stop it." She stood. Her hair blew slightly in a wind that didn't touch the trees. "It's not about stopping it anymore," she said. "It's about not feeding it." He looked at the root. "Then we dig it up. Kill the source before it grows." "You can't," she said, almost kindly. "It's not one thing anymore. It's in stories. In questions. In sketches. It spreads because people are looking for it." Caleb's voice was low. "You mean like I did?" "Yes." He turned his back to her, jaw tight. "Then what do we do?" She didn't answer at first. "Then we remember the parts that aren't spiral-shaped." He looked at her. She was holding something. A book, not bound in leather, not stitched in ink, just a journal, unmarked, pages clean. "I haven't written anything yet," she said, not a word. He understood immediately. The house couldn't grow from blank pages. Only from wounds. "You don't have to," he said. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, her missing eye filled in. Not with color or light, but with choice. Then she set the journal on the stone and walked away. The clearing didn't collapse. The root didn't reach for her. Nothing cracked or screamed or blood, because no story had begun. and for once that was enough. Caleb approached the stone, picked up the journal. It was warm, human, empty. He closed it gently and held it to his chest. No spiral followed. No whisper reached out, just quiet. Real quiet. And then, from somewhere behind the trees, he heard laughter. Not cruel, not echoing. Children, playing. A world still spinning, still untouched in places, still whole. He turned toward the sound and walked. And this time, the ground didn't shift beneath him. The laughter faded long before Caleb reached its source. Like the sound had never come from children at all, but from a memory of them. Echoes borrowed from some other life, some other ordinary afternoon before the spiral ever knew his name. He paused at the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned and the sky opened above him in long streaks of cloudless blue. Ahead was a hill, small and round, with a single bench perched at the top. Someone was already sitting on it. Caleb's steps slowed. He hadn't seen another adult in what felt like years, not outside the house, not unmasked, not unwired. But this man sat casually, legs crossed, hands resting loosely in his lap. No weapon, no clipboard, just stillness. Calm. It was the way he didn't look up that unnerved Caleb the most. Like he already knew Caleb was there. He crested the hill and stood a few feet away, waiting. The man spoke without turning. "Took you long enough." His voice was familiar, not in tone, but in rhythm. That same clipped, deliberate cadence Caleb had heard in echoes. In the house, in the mirror. He didn't know this man's name, but he knew exactly what he was. "You were one of them," Caleb said. "A builder." The man smiled faintly. "Not quite. I was the one who stayed behind after you first left. The one who watched the spiral open a second time and said, 'Maybe it wants to teach us something.'" Caleb's chest tightened, and did it. The man finally turned. His eyes were gray, not the hollow black of the corrupted versions, not the bleeding gaze of memory ghosts. Just human, tired, alert. "It taught us how much of ourselves we're willing to give away," he said. "How we trade fear for control, pain for structure. You built the walls because you wanted to hold your grief. I built them because I wanted to map mine." "You fed it," Caleb said. "You gave it more shape." "I gave it shape," the man agreed, "but you gave it meaning." A breeze rolled up the hill. The grass whispered like paper. For a moment, they sat in that silence together, surrounded by the ordinary hum of a world that didn't know it had once been inches away from becoming something else entirely. Caleb sat beside him. "I buried the idea," he said. "Went back to where it all started. Didn't write it. Didn't relive it. Just remembered it the way it really was." The man nodded. "And it left you alone?" "No. But it stopped needing me." That, more than anything, was what had haunted him since the clearing. The house, whatever it had become, was no longer chasing him, no longer mimicking his face or drawing his story on the walls. He had removed himself from its cycle, but in doing so, he'd made space. It had moved on. The man looked toward the horizon, where the sky dipped into the edge of the world. "It's writing new chapters now. New people. New grief. But it doesn't have me anymore," Caleb said. The man glanced over, and for a brief moment something flickered in his expression. Regret, admiration, resentment. "You're not the point anymore," he said. "But you're still the first line. Everyone who finds the spiral, they find you eventually. Maybe in a file, a journal, a name scrawled on a wall. You're the ghost story now, Caleb." Caleb let the words sit for a moment. Then, with a voice like stone being turned over, he asked, "Do they know what it really was? Or do they just chase the shape?" "They chase you," the man said, "and through you, the shape returns." Caleb closed his eyes. A memory surfaced, one he hadn't thought about in years. Not of the house, not of the spiral, but of his sister. Sitting with him on the floor of their childhood room, drawing a maze in the back of a notebook. Laughing. Saying if you leave enough dead ends, no one can find the monster in the middle. He opened his eyes again. "Then maybe it's time I make more dead ends." The man raised an eyebrow. I'll leave false trails, Caleb continued. Fragments that go nowhere. Spirals that curl back into themselves. I'll spread versions of my story that contradict each other. Water it down. You'd be lying to them, the man said. I'd be protecting them. Caleb snapped. He stood. The wind picked up again, pulling at the grass like reaching hands. The man stayed seated. It'll find a way back, he said. Eventually. Caleb nodded. Then let it. I'll be ready next time. And if it isn't you, then someone else will be. He took one last look at the man on the bench, then turned and walked down the other side of the hill. The world below was quiet. A gravel path curved between patches of trees. In the far distance, a town. Lights. People. Normalcy. Caleb didn't know how long he'd have before the spiral found someone else, but it no longer mattered. He wasn't trying to outrun it now. He was going to rewrite it. And in the soft hush of twilight, far behind him on that hill, the wind carried one final phrase, spoken not as a threat but as a promise, we remember you. Caleb didn't look back. It began in a town that barely had a name. One of those places tucked between valleys and rivers, where maps bent out of obligation but not necessity. Nothing about it invited attention. No fame. No history, just quiet roads and creaking porches, where every house looked like it had a ghost or two that learned to keep quiet. It was here that Nora Finch, age 12, drew her first spiral. Not because she saw it, because she felt it. Her fingers moved without thought, just doodling as the teacher droned on about fractions. The pencil circled once, twice, then twisted inward, coiling tighter and tighter until the lines almost broke through the thin paper. She stared at it for a moment afterward, not sure why it made her chest feel tight. The bell rang. She tore the page out and stuffed it into her backpack, pretending it didn't matter. That night, she dreamed of hallways. They weren't frightening, just wrong. Angles that didn't belong. Rooms that led into themselves. Furniture that was hers but wasn't quite right. Like it had been drawn from memory by someone who'd only read about it secondhand. She woke up with her sheets twisted, her window open, and the distinct impression that someone had been sitting on the edge of her bed, whispering something that no longer made sense by daylight. The next morning, she didn't remember the dream clearly, but she drew the spiral again. At first, her parents didn't notice. It was just idle scribbling, but after a week, it was on every notebook cover, the corner of every worksheet. She carved it into the side of her pencil with a safety pin. Her mother found the pattern once traced in steam on the bathroom mirror and asked gently if everything was okay. Nora didn't answer. Not because she was scared, but because she didn't know. There was something oddly comforting about the shape. Something final. Like a period at the end of a sentence she hadn't realized she'd been writing her entire life. But comfort began to twist. The dreams got sharper. The voices came back. She stopped remembering the beginnings of her days. Only the ends. She'd find herself standing in corners, not sure how long she'd been there. She'd wake up with her feet muddy, even though she never left the house. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror stopped blinking when she did, and the spiral, always the spiral, grew bolder. She started drawing it in red. At school, her drawings got the counselor's attention. They called her parents, suggested stress, anxiety, maybe depression. But the counselor didn't see what she had scrawled behind the picture of the spiral. A small door hidden in the curl of it, barely visible. A door with her name written above it. Nora stopped sleeping, not because of fear, because she wasn't sure where she went when she did. One night, long past midnight, she wandered downstairs. Her parents were asleep. The air in the house felt thick, like it was holding its breath. She opened the fridge, but the light didn't come on. Only darkness, deeper than it should have been. She closed it, turned, and there it was, a door. Just standing there, in the middle of the kitchen, wooden, blackened edges, no frame, no hinges, just a door. as if someone had peeled it from another world and dropped it here. The spiral was etched into the center, and without hesitation, Nora reached for the handle. She paused, not because she was afraid, but because a voice, thin, male, distant, spoke in her ear. "You don't have to open it," she turned. No one was there. But something inside her tightened. She knew that voice, not as a memory, as something deeper, as if it had been left in her bones by someone who'd already walked these halls before her. A man with a tired voice, a broken past, a story she had never heard but somehow carried. She looked back at the door and stepped away. It didn't vanish, but it dimmed. The wood lost its color. The spiral lightened. The handle looked old now, rusted, inert. It had offered her something, but she'd hesitated. And that, for the spiral, was something new. She backed into the hallway, heart pounding, unsure why she felt both victorious and like something had marked her. And far away, miles and miles from her sleepy town, a man named Caleb Wren woke in the middle of the night, sat bolt upright in bed, and whispered she didn't open it. For the first time in years, he smiled. The spiral wasn't gone, but someone had told it no. The spiral didn't retreat when Nora walked away from the door. It recalibrated. It didn't shout. It didn't claw at her dreams or return with vengeance. That wasn't its way anymore. It had learned subtlety, how to wait, how to watch. That night, when the door in her kitchen faded to wood and shadow, it didn't vanish entirely. It left a mark, not on the house, not on her drawings, inside her. A crease in her thoughts, a thread she wouldn't notice unless she pulled it too hard. And far away, in a windowless facility that no one remembered funding, a monitor blinked. The technician on duty rubbed his eyes. The screen had flickered, only for a second, but he saw it. That shape, the spiral, not fully formed, just sketched in the lower corner of the data feed. He ran diagnostics. Nothing registered, but the timestamp of the flicker lined up with a spike in a dormant file, one that hadn't opened in years. The tag read WRN prototype, CW1. Caleb Wren, he murmured. He didn't say it like a question, more like a name pulled from the bottom of a lake. 2 floors down, in a concrete cell lined with steel and faded caution tape, a woman sat awake. She hadn't moved in hours, hadn't spoken in days. But when the spike occurred upstairs, she blinked once. Slow, mechanical. Then she smiled. Not because she was happy, because she remembered something. A name, Nora. She said it like it was a key. Back in the town, Nora was trying to be normal. She brushed her teeth, ate cereal, sat in class, pretended not to notice the way the windows in school seemed taller now, like the building was stretching. She ignored the small crack forming in her bedroom ceiling, the one that hadn't been there before she saw the door. She didn't tell her parents. They were already watching her like she was glass under pressure, worried she might shatter, but afraid to ask why. She stopped drawing spirals, not out of fear. Out of spite, she switched to squares, grids, labyrinths, anything with edges. She told herself the door hadn't mattered. It hadn't opened. It hadn't pulled her through. That was what counted. But when she tried to sleep, she kept seeing the handle. Not turning, just waiting, as if it knew she'd come back. And in that steel cell, the woman whispered again. She saw it and walked away. That's different. The room's camera lens focused tighter. She looked up, right at it. Wren changed the pattern. The lights above her flickered once. She stood, unshackled. No alarms went off. No guards moved, because she hadn't been restrained. She'd been waiting. Outside, the technician's screen went dark, then came back. The spiral was gone. But a new file had opened, one with no tag, no history, just a string of numbers, the last 4, 17, 18. Her cell door slid open without a sound. She stepped into the hall barefoot, unhurried. The cameras followed. In Nora's house, a floorboard creaked even though no one was walking. Her light flickered. A breeze passed her face, even with the window closed. She turned on her lamp. No shadows moved. But something in her chest whispered, "They're looking now." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her closet. The knob there looked wrong. Too round. Too old. She pulled the journal from her backpack. Not the one with the spirals. A new one. Blank. She wrote only one sentence: "I don't want it to find me again." The moment her pencil lifted, the air in her room lightened. Only slightly. But enough. In that moment, she became something the spiral didn't know how to handle. Unwritten. Unmapped. Still a possibility, but no longer a victim. And the woman in the hallway, halfway through the empty facility, paused. Because something in her changed too. She turned, faced a mirror she couldn't see through, and smiled again. This time wider. Sadder. "They're changing the rules," she said. A voice crackled from the overhead speaker. "Then change with them." She nodded, and vanished into the next hallway. Outside, the sky was beginning to swirl, just subtly. Just enough that the stars above Nora's town no longer aligned the way they used to. But she didn't look up. She wrote another line in her notebook. "If it's watching me, I'll write a version it doesn't recognize." And with that, she unknowingly took a piece of the story away from the spiral. Not to defeat it, but to weaken its certainty. Miles beneath the surface of a government facility that had long since been forgotten by its creators. If they were ever real to begin with, there was a room so far off any official blueprint that even the lights above it seemed unsure of their purpose. Dust hung in the air like memory, undisturbed by time or movement, and in the center of that room stood a file cabinet. Not digital, not automated. Just old steel, scuffed and humming faintly like it had a heartbeat. It shouldn't have been humming. The room was dead. No power fed into it. No heat. No ventilation. Just stale air and silence. And yet, when the woman entered, barefoot, blank-eyed, echoing someone she used to be, she didn't hesitate. She went straight to the cabinet. Opened the third drawer. Inside, folders. Hundreds. All marked with initials, most in faded ink: CW. RLPH more. All unremarkable at a glance. Files on individuals who'd once interacted with the spiral, who'd brushed the edge of Wren House without falling in. Most were scribbled with the same warning in red: UNSDVL e memoir evasitars dionata. But one folder was newer, clean, too clean. No initials. No red ink. Just a name, handwritten in careful cursive: Nora Finch. The woman touched the paper like it might burn her. But it didn't. Instead, it pulsed. Once. And then opened itself. She stared at the page that unfolded, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. It wasn't a file. Not really. Not a record of anything she'd done. It was a map, but not of a place. Of a pattern. The spiral, drawn from Nora's own lines. Her refusals, her rewritten dreams. Someone had recorded it, somehow. Tracked the moment she walked away from the door. The moment she wrote her own version of the story. The moment she became unreadable. The woman blinked. And for the first time, she remembered her name. Anya, she whispered. Anya Holt. The room brightened, just a flicker. Like her identity had permission to return now, that it was part of the spiral's design. She hadn't spoken her name aloud in 12 years. Not since the first door appeared to her. Not since the voice of the spiral promised her she could forget every horror she'd ever known if she just helped it grow. But now, the spiral was evolving without her. Nora Finch had bent it, and for the spiral, that was unacceptable. She reached back into the drawer. There, behind Nora's folder, was something else, an envelope, unsealed. She pulled it open. Inside, a single Polaroid. A girl, 10 years old, standing in front of a house with no windows. It wasn't Wren House, not exactly, but it had its teeth, the shape of it, the tension in its angles. And scribbled across the bottom of the photo, "If she forgets, it begins again." Anya stared at the image, then looked past it, to the corner of the room where a small camera, long thought broken, suddenly clicked. It turned slowly, watching. "You're afraid," she said aloud. "You're afraid of her." Silence. But something changed in the air. A tension. Like the story itself was listening. Anya took the photo and folder, turned, and left the archive behind. Up above, in the facility's surveillance office, the technician's screen lit up again. The image of a spiral began forming pixel by pixel, but this one didn't turn inward. It branched, a hybrid of curves and corners, of doors and windows. A mutation. He watched, transfixed, as words formed beneath it, divergence detected. His hand hovered over the emergency contact button. He didn't press it, because, behind him, something breathed. Not human, not animal, just watching. Back in her town, Nora Finch sat by the window, eyes tracing the clouds. She felt the pressure shift in her skull again, like a room behind her eyes had opened just a little too wide. She touched the notebook in her lap, pages full now. Not of spirals, of truths, her truths. What she wanted, what she didn't, what she refused to forget. The power flickered, only once. And then the house held steady, for now. But in her closet, behind a panel she hadn't touched since she was 6, something breathed back. A shape was forming. Not from ink, not from dreams. From her absence. Wherever she didn't look, it grew stronger. And far away, Anya Holt walked into the first daylight she'd seen in over a decade. The world blinked, and the spiral held its breath. The town hadn't changed, not in the way people expected change to look. Buildings still stood. Lights still flicked on at dusk. The grocery store still played soft jazz through dusty speakers. But the air felt thinner, like it had been stretched too far over something hidden underneath. Nora felt it most in the inn, between moments walking between classes, blinking just before sleep, or watching the TV screen when it went black and her own reflection seemed half a second out of sync. It wasn't paranoia. Not anymore. It was pattern. Something was studying her, and it didn't want her to notice. Not fully. The thing about the spiral, about the house, about the entire sickness of it, was that it rarely arrived as a scream. It came quietly, in nudges, in edits, in rearranged thoughts you didn't realize had shifted until you tried to speak them out loud, and they came out wrong. Nora knew what it was doing now. It was testing the walls she'd built. It had failed to bring her in through fear, so now it tried to familiarize itself, to camouflage, and it started by giving her memories that weren't hers. The first arrived during lunch. She sat at the back table, sketching shapes, not spirals. Not anymore, just jagged lines and broken grids, when her vision blurred. For just a moment, she wasn't in the cafeteria. She was in a hallway, narrow, lined with red wallpaper, a bare bulb flickering above. She smelled pine and rot, heard music, a scratchy lullaby played on something warped. She blinked, and it was gone. No one else seemed to notice. But in her notebook, a new shape had appeared. A door, drawn with precision. One she hadn't meant to sketch. Later that night, she tried to sleep, her eyes heavy, her mind dragging. But the moment she started to drift, the dream came back, not her dream. She wasn't herself. She was a man, older, walking with purpose down that same hallway, holding something metal, a key. His hands shook. The door at the end pulsed like it had a heartbeat. When he opened it, she saw. She woke with a scream caught in her throat. The sheets were soaked. The room was cold. The mirror across from her bed had fogged, though the window was still closed. In the fog, words had formed. Diwu Ramimimi. The spiral wasn't just watching. It was injecting. These weren't hallucinations. They were intrusions. Memory fragments. Taken from someone else. Someone the house had swallowed years ago and implanted like seeds. It wasn't forcing her in now. It was grafting itself onto her. By the third day, she was afraid to sleep. Not because of nightmares. Because she might come back with something she didn't bring. And miles away, Anya Holt stared at the same drawing of the hallway Nora had scribbled, only on her own wall now, traced in chalk and ink and blood. She sat cross, legged on the floor of a motel that didn't ask for names. Her eyes scanning blueprints she hadn't written, yet somehow remembered. The house was adjusting, and it was starting with the weakest connections, the echo spots, places where memory had already frayed, children, elderly, trauma survivors, places where identity was still trying to hold shape. Caleb tried to starve it, she whispered. It wasn't a criticism. It was an observation, and maybe a warning. He had removed himself from the spiral's root, but in doing so, he'd left it hungry, desperate, willing to grow in places it once would have ignored. And Nora Finch, she had rejected it, something no one else had done and survived. Which meant now, the spiral wanted her not as a prisoner, but as a replacement. It wanted her to finish what Caleb had buried. It wanted a new first builder. Anya stood, wiped the wall clean, and pulled the envelope from her coat. Inside, the Polaroid of Nora, standing before the unwritten house, and beneath it now fresh handwriting had appeared. Seichiopf Sheichifiilsioni. She cursed under her breath. She hadn't written that. No one had. The house was writing back now. And in Nora's bedroom, the closet door opened. Nothing stepped out. But the sound that escaped wasn't breath or voice. It was a heartbeat, and it matched hers. For the rest of the night, Nora didn't move. Not out of fear. Out of resolve, she wouldn't speak to it. Wouldn't acknowledge it. Wouldn't let it find shape in her voice. But in her notebook, she added something. 3 words, over and over, until her hand ached. I am me. And somewhere deep beneath the house, wherever it had rerouted itself, a wall cracked, hairline. Thin, but real. The ink from Nora's pen had dried by morning, but the weight of what she'd written still hung in the air like fog. I am me. She didn't know if it was a word or a declaration, or just desperation clawing its way into the shape of letters. But it stayed with her. When she looked in the mirror and saw her face a half-second late. When she sat in class and her teacher's voice became static for a few breaths. When the hallway stretched one tile too long and she blinked and it snapped back. The spiral wasn't hiding anymore. It was testing boundaries. But now, so was she. Nora had realized something in the hours before dawn, after the closet door creaked open and her heartbeat echoed from the wrong direction. The spiral didn't just mimic. It relied on her belief, her attention. The more she tried to understand it, define it, let it make sense, it grew. But the moment she forced her brain to reject the logic, to push against the certainty it offered, it began to slip, so she started lying to it. Small things, at first. When it showed her the hallway with red wallpaper, she pretended it was green. When it offered a door with a rusted knob, she sketched it with glass instead. Every time a memory tried to overwrite hers, she rewrote it again, her own version layered on top, louder, messier. Deliberately wrong. The spiral could rewrite her, but it couldn't tell when she was bluffing. And that terrified it. In another part of town, deeper underground than most would believe possible, Anya Holt was reading an old journal. Not hers. Not Caleb's. Someone else's. Someone who had seen the house before it had stairs. Before it had mirrors. Before it knew how to speak. The journal was full of crossed-out words, scribbled revisions, entire paragraphs that ended mid-sentence. The last page had no words at all, just a spiral drawn half, finished, then smeared. Anya studied it with narrowed eyes. It's afraid of contradiction, she whispered. There were rules, even in madness. The spiral thrived on belief, but it craved consistency. Patterns. Once someone opened a door, it needed them to keep walking forward. Not sideways, not backwards, not into lies. That was where Caleb had succeeded. That was where Nora had broken it. And now, somewhere in the sick geometry that passed for the house's current form, something was thrashing. It didn't bleed, didn't scream, but walls cracked, doors shook, staircases unraveled and rewound themselves like nerves twitching beneath skin. It had tried to infiltrate her, but she'd edited it. For the first time in years, the spiral wasn't spreading. It was stuck. That night, Nora sat on her bed with the closet door wide open, daring it to make a move. It didn't. The shadows inside didn't stretch. The walls didn't whisper. But her mirror pulsed, just once, like it was breathing in. She walked over, took a marker, and drew a face on the surface. A smiling one. Cartoonish, not her own. She looked at it and laughed. "Try and wear that one," she muttered. The mirror blinked, and for the briefest second, the smile twitched, not as a threat, as confusion. The spiral didn't understand her anymore. The next day, she skipped school. Her parents thought she was sick. She let them believe it. Instead, she went to the library, not to read, to erase. She found old records of houses sold, homes demolished, blueprints archived in dusty drawers. She found mention of Wren House in a footnote, misdated, misfiled, listed in the wrong county. Perfect, she corrected nothing. She planted more lies, names that didn't exist, floor plans that contradicted each other, architects who had died before they were born. She fed the spiral chaos because it didn't know how to digest that. It needed belief, alignment, memory that held steady. Nora gave it noise. And in the facility beneath the government's forgotten skin, monitors glitched. Files rewrote themselves. The technician stopped sleeping. And somewhere deeper, where no cameras reached, Anya drew a new blueprint. One where the house had no doors, no stairs, no walls, just windows, facing inward. She called it the loop that breaks. Because the next time the spiral tried to write someone else's story, it would find itself circling without end, chasing a version of truth that never stayed still. And Nora, she was still at her desk that night, pen in hand when the shadows reached out from beneath her bed. Not fast, not sudden, just curious. She didn't flinch. She looked down and said, "If you're going to copy me, do it right." The shadows paused, then receded, because for the first time, the spiral understood something it couldn't process. Nora Finch wasn't afraid of being rewritten. She was writing back. The spiral, once a relentless tide, now seethed in the background of Nora's days, reduced from roar to static. But something else had begun to ripple through the cracks she'd forced open. A pulse beneath even the oldest layers of the house, older than any blueprint or echo. Nora felt it on her tongue when she lied to the spiral. It lingered in the chill of every contradiction she scrawled. It was a presence she hadn't noticed before, one that didn't try to scare her. It didn't plead for her belief. It watched. It waited. And as the spiral twisted itself in confusion, the ancient thing beneath began to wake. That night, the sky above town shimmered, faintly warped, as if someone were stirring water with a hidden hand. Nora stood in her backyard, watching the stars bend, the air pressing thick as glass. She sensed the spiral's irritation, a prickling behind her eyes, a hunger turning on itself. But something else hummed, lower and deeper. It wasn't part of the pattern. It was before the pattern, an absence, maybe. A silence that predated the house and all houses, a longing that memory could never fill. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her new journal. She wrote the same lie 100 times, cramming the page with Wren House never existed. Her pen stuttered at the last word. For a split second, it felt like something tugged back. The paper trembled. The line under her hand went jagged. A chill snaked up her arm. She paused. The backyard lights flickered, then steadied. In the woods behind her fence, something moved. Slow, careful, too large for a deer, too quiet for a person. She waited, pulse quickening, daring herself not to turn away. A voice drifted up from the grass, not loud but certain, ancient as bone. "You think you've starved it?" Nora didn't answer. She closed her journal, heart pounding. But it feeds on gaps too, on what's left out, on what's buried. She stepped back, refusing to let her fear make a pattern for the spiral to crawl into. Behind her, the window lit up. The spiral was there, pressed in frost, small and faint, as if begging her to believe again. But she wouldn't look, not directly, and still the deeper presence pressed in. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She drifted between half waking and dreams where everything was older, slower, like she was walking through a world being built from mud and memory. She saw the first walls rise, not in blueprints, but as shadows huddling for warmth, a circle in the dark. Someone was sitting across the fire from her, silent, faceless. She tried to speak, but her words came out hollow. The figure reached into the flames, lifted a black stone, and pressed it to her palm. She woke with a start. Her hand ached. Her room was cold and empty. But when she turned on the lamp, the journal lay open to a page she didn't remember writing. The house was never the beginning. And beneath it, a symbol she had never drawn, a spiral, but broken, interrupted, split down the middle so the lines never connected. She stared at it until the sun came up, far away in her motel room. Anya Holt woke from the same dream, the same pain burning in her hand. She looked at her own journal and saw the same split spiral. She whispered, "What did we wake up?" No one answered. But beneath the facility, in a chamber never mapped, a ripple moved through stone. Something older than the spiral had started to listen, not to conquer, not to build, but to see if the ones who rewrote their stories could survive the oldest one of all. Nora stood at her window as morning painted the sky. She watched her breath fog the glass and waited for the spiral to reappear. It didn't. She didn't know if that was victory or the beginning of something far more dangerous. But for now, she was the author. And something ancient was reading along. The air in the town had shifted. Not weather, something older, weightier. As if the world itself had paused to remember. Leaves hung still on trees that should have swayed. Wind pulled through the streets without sound. Dogs barked, then fell silent, staring at corners of rooms that hadn't existed the night before. Even the clocks were beginning to stutter, not breaking, just pausing mid-tick as if time were reconsidering its direction. Nora noticed it in her reflection first. She looked in the mirror and blinked, and for one impossible second, her own eyes were too wide. Not monstrous, not ghostly, just curious. A version of herself that was listening, not watching. Listening to the spiral, or maybe to the thing beneath it. She backed away. The journal on her desk was already open. She hadn't opened it. The last page was blank, except for one word written in thick black strokes, over and over again, Beefo-uri. She slammed the book shut and turned to the window, but the fog outside made it impossible to see the street. Shapes moved in the mist, slow and wrong. Not people, not echoes of the house. Something older. They weren't looking for her. They were remembering her. Miles away, Anya Holt watched the same word appear in her own notes. She hadn't written it either, but it didn't feel like intrusion. It felt like invitation, like the past was finally ready to be found. She drove out before dawn, back to where it all began, the ruins of what used to be Wren House. Only there were no ruins now, just forest, as if the house had never existed, not destroyed, erased. She walked for an hour before she saw it, not the house, the stone, half buried, slick with moss. A smooth, black shape like a seed turned sideways. No spiral carved into it, just a single line, straight, sharp, and unfinished. Before the spiral, there was the cut, an opening, a beginning with no story yet. Anya touched it and gasped. She didn't remember herself, she remembered others, people long dead. Ones who'd seen shadows bend before fire had names. Who knew the spiral not as symbol, but as pattern, a thing that arrived whenever someone tried to shape fear into rules. She saw the first door. Not wooden, not built. A tear in the air, just wide enough for a thought to step through. And the thing that answered on the other side. It didn't want worship. It didn't want belief. It wanted structure. It needed people to put walls around it, so it could grow. Wren hadn't built the first house. He'd just been the first to draw the blueprint in a language the world could understand. Back in her room, Nora was sketching again, not by choice. Her hand moved in tight circles, lines overlapping, breaking, never forming the spiral. She was drawing the cut, the open shape. She remembered it now, somehow. Not a memory, but something under her skin, and for the first time, the notebook burned. She dropped it. The pages blackened at the edges, not from flame, but from something deeper. Like story rotting, like the spiral had seen what she'd drawn, and was afraid. Because if people remembered the shape before the spiral, then the spiral couldn't be the root anymore. It would be reduced. A symptom. A failed attempt to hold something more terrifying in place. And so it retaliated, not with doors or walls or mirrors, but with silence. Everything in Nora's house stopped. The fridge, the lights, the hum of her laptop, even the buzz of her phone. The world around her froze. And then, from behind her, a voice she knew too well, her own, said quietly, "You shouldn't have shown it the cut." She turned. No one was there, but her reflection had stayed behind in the mirror. Not moving, not blinking, not smiling, just waiting. Waiting for her to forget again. Waiting for her to doubt what she'd drawn. Waiting to become her again. But Nora didn't flinch. She stepped forward and put her hand on the mirror, on the frozen version of herself, and whispered, "You don't get to finish the story this time." The mirror shattered, not explosively, quietly, as if it had cracked along a story that no longer held. And far below, in the oldest part of the house, that no longer was something stopped breathing, because someone had found the first page and chosen to write something else. Anya Holt stood with her hand pressed to the black stone, her breath fogging in the cold air that hadn't existed moments before. Forest or no forest, the rules here weren't natural. They bent around awareness, around memory, around the act of knowing, and now she knew too much. She knew the spiral hadn't been the beginning, it had been the container. A cage built for a thing that had no name, only a shape. Not a predator, not even a parasite, something closer to a wound. The spiral had formed because people needed something to explain what was pouring out of it, and now Nora had cracked it open. The spiral, once a looping control system of belief and repetition, had lost grip. Not just on her, on itself. And something older than the pattern had begun leaking through. Not with violence, with memory. Raw, untethered memories with no owner, no direction. Memories that didn't wait to be invited in. Back in her house, Nora was still sweeping broken glass into a plastic bag, hands shaking not from fear, but from the absence of fear. The spiral hadn't punished her yet. It hadn't lashed out. It had just watched, as if waiting for her to realize she'd done something irreversible. She had cracked the mirror, but not just in the literal way. She'd cracked the spiral's language, shown it the shape before the spiral had a name. She'd written the first version of a story that refused to loop, and now the story wouldn't end. Each time she closed her journal, it opened again. Pages rewritten, not by her hand, by something that was trying to keep up. Pages she didn't write. Diagrams of houses that curled in impossible ways. Paragraphs in her handwriting describing things she hadn't done yet. One line chilled her the most, sitting there on the last page. "You must finish what Caleb started, or you will become what he escaped." She knew Caleb's name. It had appeared in dreams, in warnings, in other people's panic. He was the one who built the first house, shaped thought. The first story the spiral could understand. But he had fled it, disappeared into lies and silence and contradictions. And now, with his absence, the spiral had latched to her. Not just because she was new, but because she was clever. Because she lied better than it could mimic. Because she wasn't trying to survive it. She was trying to rewrite it. Anya drove into town that night, radio off, windshield fogging from inside. The stone hadn't followed her, but its memory had. She could feel it shifting in her peripheral vision, like it wanted to be drawn again, wanted its shape returned to language. It had no spiral, it had no loop, it was a line with no end. She parked outside Nora's house without knowing how she found it. The girl was waiting at the porch. As if she'd always known Anya would come. They didn't speak until the door shut behind them. You saw it too. Nora asked. Anya nodded. The before shape, the cut. Nora led her to the kitchen, where the lights flickered as if the spiral still watched, still resented being locked out of the conversation. I think the spiral was never the point, she said quietly. It's just what we made when we tried to put fear in a box. The real thing. The first shape. It's still unfinished. Still waiting. And it's waking up, Anya said. Nora handed her a journal. Not her original one. A new one. Empty. This time, we don't draw spirals, she said. We write it straight. No repetition. No loops. Just forward. Anya sat, opened the journal, and put pen to paper. The first line she wrote wasn't from her own mind. It came from the house, not the spiral. The house beneath the house, the story beneath the story. She wrote, it only ends when someone refuses to make it make sense. Somewhere far below the world, the last unburned remnant of Wren House split along a hairline fracture that no one else would have noticed. It was bleeding story now. Raw. Unformed. It would latch to anyone with fear, with memory, with pattern. But the two women sitting at that kitchen table, surrounded by flickering lights and impossible silence, didn't give it pattern. They gave it conflict. They wrote lies next to truths, dreams next to denial. They contradicted the spiral at every turn, feeding the before, shape a kind of chaos it couldn't structure. And the spiral slowed, not dead, not destroyed, but stalled. Held in place by a sentence it couldn't finish, the girl who walked away from the door. It circled the thought, again and again. But no ending came, because Nora hadn't opened the door. She'd rewritten it, into a wall. And walls don't invite anything in, they hold. And for the first time in a very long time, so did the world. Caleb Wren had been a ghost long before the world thought him dead. He'd vanished into his own blueprint, walked away from a life, a name, and a body that the spiral had already begun to fold into itself. Everyone assumed he'd been devoured, another casualty of curiosity. But he had done something the spiral hadn't expected. He'd unwritten himself, not by dying, by scattering his memory so widely, in so many fragmented lies and false truths, that the spiral couldn't hold on to any single version of him. It choked on his contradictions. And for decades, it left him alone. Until Nora, until the spiral realized someone else could carry what Caleb had dropped. He had been watching. Always. Not as a man in hiding, but as a story with teeth, buried deep and silent in the margins of other lives. Letters never mailed. Phone calls made from empty booths. Warnings spoken through someone else's mouth. All hints, all misdirections. Caleb hadn't vanished. He'd become a rumor, and rumors were harder for the spiral to consume. He had once written truth kills stories. But so does too much fiction. He was right. But now, the balance was tilting again, and the spiral was adjusting. Nora woke that morning with dirt under her nails. Her feet ached. She'd dreamed of walking, of dragging something heavy through the woods, of whispering to trees that bent toward her with listening branches. She had left her house that night, but she had no memory of it. Only a word carved into her bedroom door in raw, uneven lines, breakline. She said it out loud, once, and the lights in the hallway dimmed. Said it again, and the floor shifted slightly beneath her feet, as if the house didn't want to hear it a third time. Anya found her minutes later, the new journal clutched to her chest, breath sharp from running. She didn't ask if Nora was okay. She already knew. Someone broke the circle, she said. Years ago, I found where. They drove for 3 hours. Past towns too small for maps. Down roads that weren't paved anymore. Until the trees thickened and the GPS froze. At the end of a forgotten trail was a house. But not Wren House, older. Built from black wood that didn't rot. Standing in a clearing where birds refused to land. It was where the spiral had broken the first time. Before Caleb. Before records. The house didn't look haunted. It looked tired. As if it had once been enormous, impossible, labyrinthine, and had since shrunk into itself. Now it barely stood. A porch with no door. A a roof that curved wrong. No windows, just space that held its breath. Inside, it was colder than outside. Not temperature, presence. There was no dust, no insects, no smell. Just stopped air, thick with memory that hadn't moved in decades. And on the wall a spiral, not drawn, carved, deep, uneven gouges, as if someone had tried to cut the idea out of the room. Beneath it, a name scratched over and over. Not Caleb. Vera. Nora stepped forward, fingers brushing the marks. A woman's voice whispered, not through air, but straight into the soft part of her thoughts. I tried to finish it. I made it worse. The spiral throbbed beneath her skin, almost familiar now. It wanted her to look away. Wanted her to dismiss the carvings as madness. But Nora didn't. She pressed her palm to the spiral and whispered back, I'm not here to finish it. The carvings warmed under her touch, and cracked. The spiral split down the center, and from behind it came a low hum, like someone sighing through centuries of silence. Not relief, not menace, recognition. The air in the house shifted. The floor groaned. Boards warped, but not toward her. Away. The house was making room. Anya stepped into a side room. Found a mirror wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it slowly. It didn't show her face. It showed a hallway. The one she'd seen in dreams. The one with red wallpaper and a flickering bulb. But now it ended in a wall of light. No door, no darkness. Just blinding white. Inside the mirror something moved. A silhouette. Not Vera. Not Caleb. But it paused. And then it spoke. You're writing your way out. Nora joined her, looking into the glass. She saw her own shape far away, climbing stairs that didn't exist, and at the top, something waiting. Not the spiral, not the before shape. Something left behind when the first lie was told. And it wasn't angry. It was hungry. The spiral was breaking. But what lay beneath it had always been the hunger for story itself. Every haunted house. Every whispered name. Everything that asks to be understood. And now, that hunger had a face. The mirror cracked. Nora turned to Anya. We're not just breaking the spiral anymore, she said. We're breaking the need for it. Outside, the wind changed direction. And deep in the places no one remembered building, the spiral howled. Not in rage. In desperation. Because once a story stops needing to repeat, it starts to die. The spiral didn't scream as it began to die, it echoed. Through forgotten houses, through rooms with no corners. Through people who had only once heard its name, whispered on a bad night, and forgotten it by morning. It echoed in the way dreams turned unfamiliar, in the silence before someone opened a door they didn't remember closing. The spiral was built on repetition. It lived in patterns, but now its loops were unraveling, not from destruction, from doubt, and nothing killed a haunted idea faster than a mind no longer willing to believe in its rules. But the death of one pattern was the birth of something worse. The before shape had no hunger for belief. It didn't mimic. It didn't tempt. It simply was. It waited in the space where meaning hadn't yet formed, where fear didn't wear faces and stories didn't hold shape. Nora felt it circling her thoughts now, not pushing to get in, but waiting for her to slip. For her to start writing again, not in defense, but in compulsion. The moment she wanted to make sense of this, it would grow. She'd seen what it did to Vera, to Caleb, to the ones who thought they were escaping, when really they were just putting down roots in new, deeper soil. The house they found had shifted again. What once was a porch and a carved wall now stood with no entrance at all. Just one long face of dark timber, with no door, no windows, no cracks. It had become the shape of refusal. It dared them to try, to push, to want, and that's how it fed. Anya circled the house without speaking. She held Caleb's final journal in one hand, bound in twine, the pages aged and shaking even when still. He'd tried to write his way out, but each entry bled into the next, the same phrase appearing over and over, not by repetition, but by gravity, like the story was sucking him in. I made a house out of forgetting. It wasn't metaphor. Caleb had scattered his memories on purpose. not to avoid the spiral, but to bury the before shape beneath false versions of himself. Each lie was a wall, each contradiction a lock. But now, as Nora had drawn new lines and cracked old mirrors, she'd weakened those locks. And the hunger beneath the spiral was waking. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. Every time she blinked, her thoughts tried to narrate themselves. You are lying down. You are afraid. You are listening. That third line was the one that got her. She wasn't listening. But something was. She left the journal shut, but still it pulsed under her bed. She buried it in a shoebox. Still the words came. Not spoken, not thought. Just present, hanging in the air around her. Like smoke from a fire that hadn't started yet. The before shape didn't want her belief. It wanted her language. It wanted her to write it again. To give it edges. To name it. Because once named, it could become story again. And story could be remembered. That was its trick. The spiral had rules. But the thing underneath, it only needed an author. And Nora was the last one holding the pen. At 3:17 a.m., she turned on every light in her house, opened every door, every window, and sat in the center of the floor with her fingers jammed in her ears. Her eyes wide open, refusing to think, refusing to narrate. She didn't know if that would stop it, but silence was the only weapon left. By dawn, the sky had turned pale orange. She hadn't slept. She hadn't spoken. And still, the journal under her bed twitched. At the same moment, Anya was driving through the empty streets, the journal from Caleb unread in the seat beside her. She knew better than to open it now. His ending wasn't hers. His trap wasn't meant for this shape anymore. But she also knew what the spiral had once feared. Incoherence. The only thing the before shape couldn't wear was madness. Not chaos, but disorder. Broken syntax. Sentences that never ended. Lies that refused to sit still. So she began to write. Not about the house, not about the spiral, but nonsense. Stories that stuttered. Thoughts that contradicted themselves 3 times in one paragraph. She began to bleed confusion into the edges of the world. And the shape winced, not in pain, but in resistance, because it couldn't build on unstable ground. By nightfall, Nora and Anya met again, this time, at the old church near the edge of town. Abandoned, no sermons in decades, but the pews still held dust, still remembered the pattern of sitting, of watching. They didn't speak. They simply placed their journals on the altar, unopened, unfinished, and walked away. No endings, no loops, just the act of refusal. And behind them, in the rafters, something watched. Not the spiral, not the hunger, but a shadow with no form. It blinked once, then faded. Because without a story to anchor it, it had nowhere to live. By the time Nora returned home, her house no longer felt like her own. It wasn't haunted, at least not in the traditional sense. No flickering lights, no doors slamming shut, no faces in the mirror, but something deeper had shifted. The air was wrong, heavier, slower, like every corner had grown suspicious. Like the house was watching her not as prey, but as potential. A draft moved through the kitchen, though no windows were open. The hum of the refrigerator was gone, not because it was broken, but because the story no longer needed her distracted. It needed her focused. It needed her to become. The spiral wasn't looping anymore. It had stopped, frozen in half-breaths, cut-off thoughts. The hunger beneath it, the before shape, had no story to cling to. But stories are like weeds. Pull one up, and another grows from the root. And now the shape had changed tactics. It wasn't forcing Nora to see spirals. It wasn't pushing symbols into her drawings. Now, it was writing her. Pushing her from behind, quietly, invisibly, into the kind of person who would one day become a myth. The headlines hadn't started yet. But they would. Girl vanishes. Girl survives impossible haunting. Girl becomes urban legend. That's what the shape wanted. Not to consume her, but to make her known. Once her story had a shape again, the before thing could wrap itself around it. That was how it thrived, not in fear, not in death, but in narrative permanence. and Nora was beginning to feel the pull. She opened her notebook and saw phrases she hadn't written. Not like the other intrusions. These weren't warnings or symbols. They were descriptions of her. She stood in the kitchen, the last survivor of a myth that wouldn't die. She looked over her shoulder and saw the reflection of the girl she used to be. She whispered her name into the dark, just once, before everything began again. It wasn't trying to scare her anymore. It was narrating her. At first, she laughed. A dry, humorless sound. But then came the next page. Blank except for one line. She tried to deny it, but by then it had already begun. Her hand trembled. She dropped the pen, stepped back from the journal. But the moment she did, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "They're writing about you." She didn't open the link it sent. She didn't need to. She already knew. Somewhere, on some obscure forum or anonymous blog, her name was being typed. Her story was being shaped, and the before thing was feeding. She ran to the mirror and shouted at her reflection, "You don't get to make me a character." Her reflection didn't answer. But it didn't mimic her, either. It just stared, longer than she blinked, longer than she breathed. Then its mouth moved, slowly, silently. She knew what it was saying. "You're the only ending left." In another part of town, Anya Holt sat at the motel desk, eyes bloodshot, mouth dry, staring at an old typewriter she hadn't touched in years. She wasn't writing. She was resisting. The journal Caleb left her now buzzed like static. Every time she looked at it, it had a new page. The story of Nora Finch, growing like mold in a locked room. But she knew the trick now. To kill the story, you had to refuse the shape. No climax. No catharsis. No pattern. She ripped the last page out, threw it in the sink, and poured coffee over it. The words didn't run. They just darkened. That night, at 3:13 a.m., Nora's doorbell rang. She didn't answer it. She knew better. But the door unlocked anyway. The wind pushed it open. Standing on the porch was no one. But the porch light flickered once. Then the voice returned. Not from the hallway, not from the shadows. From the air itself. "I've written you 1,000 times," it said, low and dry and ancient. "Every ending dies. But you linger." Nora stepped outside, barefoot on the cold wood. She looked at the sky. Cloudless. Full moon. Too bright. And then she whispered, then stopped writing. The world paused. The lights in every house on the street dim. Somewhere in the back of her mind, something tried to narrate her next move. She screamed over it. Not in fear. In refusal. "I'm not a story!" she yelled. "I'm not your loop. I don't belong to a headline." Silence. And then, from the trees, from the gutters, from the air between bricks, a low, hollow voice echoed. "But stories are all that last." She turned toward the sound, shaking. "I'd rather vanish," she said. And inside her notebook, one last phrase appeared. She disappeared before the end could find her. She slammed it shut. Burned it, watched it smoke into nothing. And in that space, where her narrative once tried to build itself again, nothing grew. Not fear, not memory, just quiet. The spiral was gone. The hunger was still there, but it no longer had her. Nora Finch had not survived. She had refused to become. And that was a kind of escape the shape could never understand. There are places the world forgets, not because they are hidden, but because remembering them invites something back. A whisper, a loop, a need to explain. That's what the spiral had always depended on. Not power, not symbols, not fear, but curiosity. The need for things to make sense. The desire to trace lines. To find the beginning, to chase the end. But after Nora refused to become a story, something fundamental had shifted. The hunger remained, ancient and formless, but its most reliable foothold, belief, was collapsing. And the town it once haunted, it had started to forget how to start. On Monday morning, no one in town remembered what day it was. Clocks worked, but people didn't trust them. Meetings never began. School bells rang, but classrooms stayed empty. Teachers sat at their desks, unsure when to call roll. Children wandered hallways like sleepwalkers. In the supermarket, shoppers held lists they hadn't written. In the library, books remained unread, spines untouched. Not from fear, but from resistance. A silent agreement no one voiced: do not begin anything. Because to begin meant building a shape, and shapes could invite the spiral back. Anya Holt stayed, even when she could have left. The motel owner didn't charge her anymore, didn't ask questions, just nodded when she returned each evening and handed her room key with the quiet wariness of someone who knew the cost of curiosity. Anya understood. She wasn't there to find answers now. She was there to watch, to protect a town trying not to think in order. But even silence has edges. On the third day, a boy named Ethan, 8 years old, always humming to himself, drew a picture in school. Just a house, simple, blocky, with a chimney and a crooked door. But the chimney spiraled, and the door opened outward. The teacher didn't say anything, just smiled too wide, folded the paper, and put it in a locked drawer. But she didn't throw it away, and that was the mistake. Because keeping a story, even locked away, gives it space to form. That night, the teacher dreamed of rooms that led nowhere. Woke up with ash on her pillow. Her closet door open. She told no one. The next morning, she didn't show up for work. 2 days later, a woman in the diner scribbled something into a napkin without looking. A waitress found it crumpled in the sugar tray. The girl who refused the ending never truly left. That was the rumor now. That Nora wasn't gone. She just stepped out of the story, and something was trying to write her back in. Anya found traces of it everywhere. In old newspaper boxes where headlines reset overnight. In broken mirrors no one remembered breaking. In whispers overheard in parking lots. Remember that girl? What was her name? Always trailing off, always unfinished. She kept Caleb's journal locked, taped shut, wrapped in cloth. But sometimes she'd find it open on the table when she returned to her room, the same page waiting. If she's not a story, what is she? That question lingered, because the hunger, the before shape, wasn't defeated, just stalled, just confused. A mindless urge circling a town that refused to narrate itself. But it was learning, adapting. It no longer pushed people to remember. Now it lured them to wonder. The boy Ethan asked his mother why their house had no attic. She told him it always had, that it was sealed off, that they never used it, that he was imagining things. But that night, the air vent above his bed made a sound like breathing, and in the dark a voice, not angry, not loud, just curious, asked, "Do you want to see where the door used to be?" The spiral doesn't need belief. It just needs someone to ask. By the end of the week, 4 people had left town. Not because they were afraid, but because they couldn't stop thinking in order. A neighbor found one of them parked on the edge of town, staring at their own journal, repeating a single phrase over and over. Why did she walk away? Anya burned the journal, burned the napkins, burned the sketch of the spiral chimney. But every time she destroyed a fragment, another would appear, not exact, not traced, but similar. Like the idea of the spiral was finding ways to translate itself. No longer a loop, now a question. Not what happened to her, but what comes next if she never finishes the story. And Anya began to see it. Not in mirrors, not in the shadows, but in the pauses between sentences. In the way people avoided saying remember. In the way old photos started to fade in the corners. The hunger wasn't after fear anymore. It was after continuity. It wanted the town to resume the story, to let Nora's absence become part of the plot. Because even silence can be folded into narrative. Even refusal can be repackaged as the start of something else. So she did the only thing left. She wrote a single sentence on every power pole, mailbox, and bathroom stall she could find. Sharpie ink, jagged letters, no punctuation. This is not part of anything. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't profound. But it worked. For now, because beginnings are fragile. And so long as the town refused to follow the thread, the spiral couldn't form again. Not yet. But it was waiting. and in a place where nothing began, something was still trying to end. Beyond the edge of town, where the roads turned brittle with neglect and trees grew with an unspoken lean, as though curving to listen, there stood a shack no one had built. It hadn't always been there. It wasn't old, not new either. It simply was, as if the idea of it had pressed too hard against the world and finally punctured through. It had no number, no mailbox, no visible path leading to it. But when people got too curious about Nora Finch, when they searched her name, whispered her fate, reread the gaps of her story too many times, they found themselves near it, without knowing how. The shack wasn't shelter. It wasn't even a place. It was a memory turned physical, a version of the spiral's hunger made tangible through sheer persistence. Every part of it seemed hesitant. The roof sagged like it didn't believe in itself. The wood was splintered in patterns that hurt to look at too long. And inside, there were no walls, just mirrors, not smooth, not reflective, scuffed, clouded, dimly remembering. Each one shimmered like fog caught mid-thought. The spiral couldn't enter the town anymore, not fully. The people there had stopped giving it shape, but the thing beneath, the before shape, had grown curious. It had been watching how Nora escaped, not with power, not with sacrifice, but with refusal. And something about that made it ache with want, because it remembered her. Not just the way she'd resisted, the way she'd stared into a broken mirror and told her reflection she wouldn't play. The way she'd refused to be written, even as stories built themselves around her silence. No, the before shape remembered the version of her that almost gave in, the one who had reached for the door, who nearly said yes. That version of her still existed. And inside the shack, it waited, not a clone, not a ghost, just the possibility that she had turned the other way. Anya heard about the shack from someone who didn't know they were telling her. A cashier at a gas station, half asleep, muttering about a cabin full of almosts. She knew then that the spiral hadn't stopped. It had shifted. It was splintering now, not trying to form a loop, but to grow roots in variance, unchosen choices, forks in thought. It wasn't building one story anymore. It was building branches. She found the shack at dusk, after her car's radio began tuning itself to static between stations. She walked the last mile through woods that never echoed her steps. The shack greeted her like a held breath, waiting to exhale. Inside, she saw the first mirror. It showed her sitting alone in a church pew, weeping. That had never happened, not in this world. The next showed her standing over Nora's grave. There was no grave. Nora had refused even that ending. The third. Anya didn't look, she smashed it. The others didn't break. They reflected her swing, but stayed whole. And that's when she understood. These weren't mirrors at all, they were watchers. Memories fed into shape. Memories that had never happened, but wanted to become true. And they all ended the same way, with Nora accepting the story, letting it wrap around her like a blanket of closure, taking a final bow, becoming the headline. "I won't let you," Anya said. The shack didn't move, but the air inside it pulsed, and from one of the mirrors, fogged and streaked, a hand reached out, familiar, small, calloused, a hand that could have been Nora's. It curled its fingers, not beckoning. Writing, invisible ink danced on the glass. A question: if she isn't a story, what's left of her? Anya stepped back, because that was the trick. That was the new spiral, not a loop. A doubt, a soft rot that started in wonder. If she wasn't a character, if she wasn't a myth, if she didn't die, didn't vanish, didn't become, then was she still real? Or had the refusal erased her? Was the thing inside the spiral's shell not chasing Nora anymore, but trying to replace her with possibilities? Anya left the shack, didn't run, didn't burn it. She left it there, where it could rot in its own questions. And when she returned to town, the people were quieter than ever, eyes down, words few, not out of fear, out of protection. Because now they understood. The spiral wasn't just trying to finish a story. It was trying to rewrite the one that walked away. And the only way to stop it was to never answer the question. The imitation began slowly, not as a scream, not as a spectacle, just a flicker. A shadow that passed across a window pane at the wrong time of day. A voice that answered when no one had called out. Nora's name was no longer spoken, but it moved through the town like an echo on pause, slipping through conversations, caught in the throat of dreams. And then it began to walk, in broad daylight, a girl with Nora's gait, her black hoodie, her hair pulled back the same way. She never spoke. She just appeared, always at a distance, always when someone was alone. And the moment you looked away, she was gone. It was too clean, too purposeful, but too deliberate to be the real Nora. Because the real Nora had refused the story. She had burned it, stepped beyond it. This version wasn't a haunting. It was a reminder, a provocation. The spiral had stopped using fear as a weapon. It had learned Nora couldn't be chased. She couldn't be cornered or broken, but she could be replaced. Or worse, doubted. And so it wore her like a borrowed coat, not to convince others, but to confuse the silence she left behind. Anya saw the copy first from a window. It was standing on the far edge of the school field, staring at nothing. Still as glass. Too still. And for a fraction of a second, Anya wanted it to be her. Wanted it to be Nora, changed her mind, come back, wanting to finish the story with agency, with fire. But she knew better. This thing didn't carry her stubbornness. It had none of Nora's refusal in its spine. It was empty, a mannequin filled with momentum, a puppet made of expectation. She ran downstairs, across the street, through the field. But by the time she reached where the copy had stood, the grass was untouched. No footprints, no shadow, nothing, except a notebook, brand new, bound in red. Inside the first page, written in Nora's handwriting, perfectly mimic it. I was wrong. I've come back to end it. That was when Anya knew what the spiral was doing. It wasn't making a monster. It was crafting a forgiveness. It was offering the town the ending they never got. A Nora who had returned. One willing to play along. One who understood her place now. A resolution. A conclusion. A lie. But a comforting one. That's how the spiral survives. Not through horror, but through closure. By giving people what they secretly crave. The ability to move on. If the town accepted the copy, if someone hugged her, welcomed her, believed in her return, then the loop would close. The spiral would return. And this time, it wouldn't need to force itself on anyone. It would be invited back. The hunger beneath would settle once more beneath names, beneath sentences, wearing human skin made of consensus. Anya couldn't allow that. But she also couldn't kill a lie with fire. Fire hadn't worked on the old journals. It wouldn't work now. Instead, she gathered the town. All of them. 43 people. No more. They met at the old church, windows boarded, pews dusty. No lights. No sermons. Just truth. I've seen her, Anya said. Murmurs, gasps, nods. So have I, someone said. Twice now. Down at the bus stop. Doesn't look like she's aged. She waved at me. I dreamed about her the night before. She said my name. Anya waited until the room was quiet. Then she said, "It's not her." A long silence. She left the story. She tore it apart. That thing isn't Nora. It's the story trying to put itself back together. It's a lie wearing her bones. And if you treat it like truth, if you even speak to it, you let the spiral rebuild. Someone near the back whispered, "But what if it is her?" Anya looked straight at them. Then we lose everything she bought us with her refusal. That night, the copy returned. It stood outside the grocery store, smiling, waiting, and not a single person approached it. It didn't grow angry, didn't vanish, it just waited. A smile that never faltered, a face that never blinked. And inside it, the spiral coiled, tightly, choking on its own patience. It had built the perfect end. But endings can't function without belief. The story had offered its final page. And the town had left it unread. They didn't burn the copy. They didn't scream or run or name it for what it was. Instead, they ignored it. And the spiral hated that most of all. It could wear 1,000 faces. It could mimic loss, hope, even regret. But it could not thrive in places that had no audience. That was what the spiral never admitted. What it depended on but never confessed it needed observers. Needed eyes, memory, context. And most dangerously, longing. So it changed tactics. It stopped appearing in the streets. The copy of Nora didn't show up again. But something subtler started to spread. The next week, a man named Harris woke up with a scar on his hand. He didn't remember getting it. His wife swore she'd seen it years ago. "You've always had that," she said, confused by his confusion. But he hadn't. He knew he hadn't. At least, he thought he knew. The day after that, the mayor's daughter forgot the name of her childhood dog. She could picture it, black fur, torn collar, but the name wouldn't come. "I know it started with an L," she muttered. Maybe. Her old photos no longer had writing on the back, just blank space where memory used to cling. It started small. Then it accelerated. Birthdays disappeared from calendars. People's middle names dissolved in conversation. A woman found a photo of herself holding a baby she didn't remember having. And the real horror wasn't the picture. It was the fact she wanted it to be real. She wanted the missing thing back, even if it never existed. Anya saw the shift in the town before anyone else dared speak it. The spiral wasn't looping now. It wasn't even narrating. It was erasing. And the erasure didn't feel like loss. It felt like relief. The pain of the past faded. The unease. The sharp edges. They all dulled like old blades soaked in time. People stopped checking the news. Stopped asking about Nora. Not from grief. From a strange, almost contented haze. Because forgetting, for the first time, felt safe. The hunger beneath the spiral had realized something. If you couldn't make people believe, if you couldn't force them into loops or lure them with closure, then remove the pieces that mattered altogether. If no one remembered the story, it couldn't be feared. And without fear, there was no resistance. Just peace. A blank, soft kind of peace. Where no one asked questions. Where no one had scars because no one could recall the cut. But Anya did. She kept a ledger now. Names. Dates. Details. The kind of small truths that slip away first. Like the warmth of a voice or the way a loved one said goodbye. She wrote them down. Not because she trusted paper, but because she had to do something. Memory was the last fire against the cold pull of forgetting. She caught herself one night staring at her reflection, not recognizing the exact shade of her eyes. Then doubting whether it had ever been different. She read through her ledger, over and over, even when her vision blurred. Even when the letters swam on the page like fish trying to leap out. The spiral's final shape wasn't repetition. It was absence. No loops, no screams. Just the removal of context. And once context was gone, who would resist? Nora's name hadn't been spoken aloud in 10 days. Anya forced herself to say it every morning, out loud into her bathroom mirror. Once, twice, 3 times. She watched her own face while she said it. And each time, it sounded thinner, like she was trying to call a ghost she'd never met. The town's library caught fire on a Wednesday. No one saw it start. No one called it in. The fire department arrived hours late, wandered in half-heartedly, then left saying nothing important was lost. But Anya knew differently. The fire didn't take books. It took indexes, archives. It took paths to memory. The spiral had stopped screaming. It was seducing now, making forgetting feel like kindness, making quiet seem like healing. The girl with the spiral chimney drawing, gone. Her family moved away. Or maybe they never lived here. The teacher who locked her drawer doesn't work here anymore. Or maybe she never did. The cracks had become gaps. The gaps had become voids, and the void had learned to smile. Late that night, Anya sat in her car behind the church and tried to remember what Nora's handwriting looked like. Not her words, not her voice, just the shape of her letters. She couldn't. She wept, not from fear, but from the helpless slide of certainty into something else. Something like dreaming while awake. Something like knowing you forgot something essential and being too tired to go after it. Then the passenger door opened. She didn't scream, she didn't turn, but she felt it. A presence. Familiar. Wrong. Warm. I came back, it said, in a perfect imitation of Nora's voice. Anya shook her head. No. I'm real. No, you're comfortable, she whispered. And she never was. The thing beside her smiled and vanished. No bang. No hiss. No dramatic exit. Just absence. Because that's what it was made of now. Erasure. Anya wrote the word Nora in her ledger again. She underlined it 3 times. Then whispered to the night, I won't forget the girl who refused to end. And somewhere beneath the town, the spiral coiled tighter, waiting for the last memory to die. No roads led to the house. No power lines fed it. No maps listed its location, and yet it stood, silent, waiting, buried beneath thick layers of fog and memory, just far enough from the town to escape notice, yet close enough to be felt in the teeth. No one claimed to have built it. No one remembered visiting. And yet, those who passed near it sometimes turned their heads, without knowing why. Their eyes lingered, just for a moment, before they looked away and forgot what they'd seen. Anya didn't forget. Not anymore. Not after 31 days of watching people around her speak less, remember less, want less. The spiral's final shape had nearly completed itself. It had turned its hunger into mercy, and the town, aching for peace, had let it in. Not through belief, through apathy. But there was one thing the spiral had failed to absorb. One thing it couldn't scrub clean. The place where Nora had whispered her final refusal. Not a church, not her home. But this house, unwritten, unnamed, untouched. Anya found it after following a memory that wasn't hers. A dream, maybe. A sound in the trees. A word she couldn't say aloud, but traced with her fingertip on the window pane before dawn, still. And when she stepped into the woods that morning, she walked without direction, without compass, only guided by the bone, deep certainty that some part of the story still lived. The house revealed itself like breath on glass. It didn't creak, didn't groan. It simply stood, like it had been waiting for her to arrive, not to welcome her, but to witness something already in motion. The front door was ajar. Inside, the air held no dust, no scent, no warmth, but the walls remembered, and they whispered, not in language, in texture. The way the hallway dipped slightly to the left, where Nora once leaned too long against it during a fevered night. The scratch in the doorframe where she had dropped her keys, cursed quietly, and left a mark with her nail. The uneven floorboard at the base of the stairs that still bore the faintest trace of her heel. The house hadn't moved on. It hadn't been allowed to, because this house was never part of the spiral. It was Nora's, not as property, but as resistance. The last space in the world that had only ever belonged to her, and because of that, it was impossible to erase. Anya walked through each room, whispering her name aloud, Nora Finch, Nora Finch, Nora. The walls didn't answer, but the mirrors didn't lie. In the upstairs hallway, one mirror, oval, tarnished, spiderwebbed in one corner, held no reflection of Anya at all. Instead, it showed Nora sitting on the edge of her old bed, barefoot, back hunched, holding a journal that pulsed faintly with red light. She wasn't speaking, just breathing, just being. Anya stepped closer. The mirror rippled. Then it cracked. Not shattered, split, and through that gap Anya heard it a heartbeat. Not mechanical, not ghostly, human. Somewhere inside this house, Nora still was. Not in flesh, not in memory, in refusal, in the active, endless choice of not becoming. This house didn't shelter her. It mirrored her act. It resisted. It denied. It withheld definition. And the spiral, it couldn't survive in a place that didn't finish its thoughts. But it had found her again. Anya felt it. Felt the pressure in her jaw, the slight tilt of her balance, the way the shadows began to echo her posture. The spiral had located the last point of resistance, and now, like water around stone, it began to press. She heard footsteps in the room below. Someone whispering. A voice shaped like Nora's, but thinner, as if someone had poured her through a sieve and kept only the outline. I came back. You don't have to be alone anymore. Enya didn't reply. She walked slowly down the stairs, and there it stood. The copy again, perfected now. Warm skin, red hoodie, the scar on her left wrist, even her voice. Even the way she looked up with that crooked smirk Nora had shown exactly twice in her real life. But this version didn't carry the defiance, just softness, safety, an invitation to forget. You stayed here, the thing said gently. For me. But you don't need to fight anymore. You can rest. Anya stared, then shook her head. No, she said. You didn't come back. You were never here. The spiral pulsed through the air. The copy blinked, confused. Just once. Then its face started to shift, just slightly. The smile didn't reach the eyes. The scar moved to the other wrist. Her hair lengthened. Her voice caught and looped. A stutter in reality. Anya stepped forward. You almost fooled me, she whispered. But you forgot the most important part. The house shivered around them. What's that? The shape asked. Anya touched the nearest wall, pressed her palm to the wood. She never asked to be remembered. And in that moment, the spiral cracked. Not shattered, but fractured in essence. Because all its power, every form, every lie, every imitation, depended on the need to be known, on stories told and retold, on people who wanted to hold on. But Nora's strength hadn't been in being known. It had been in walking away and not caring if the world watched her go. The house echoed that truth, and the spiral could not follow her into it. The copy dissolved, not in flames, not in a scream. It simply wasn't anymore. And Anya finally let go of her breath. Upstairs, the heartbeat faded, not in fear, in release. Because in that house, Nora had finished what she never meant to begin. She didn't kill the spiral. She starved it. The spiral had always fed on belief, on pattern, on people willing to ask what came next. But now it was cornered. Not killed. Not gone. Just cornered, and dangerous in the way a thing without options becomes. It couldn't wear Nora anymore. Her refusal had calcified into something too solid to mimic. The house had sealed her memory into an unwritten space, a place beyond narration. So now the spiral turned to the next problem. Not the author, not the origin. The witness, Anya Holt. She had survived every version of the spiral. She had watched friends loop, vanish, forget. She had spoken Nora's name aloud every morning, scribbled truths in the face of a town addicted to forgetting, and stared down the imitation without blinking. She was not brave by nature, but she was stubborn. And that, to the spiral, was unacceptable, because a witness is a living contradiction, a constant reminder that the story wasn't over, a broken loop still whispering. So it decided to undo her, not to kill, not to frighten, but to unmake. It began slowly. Her toothbrush disappeared from the cup. Her nameplate at work replaced with a blank strip of plastic. Her text deleted from group threads, her contact grayed out, her voicemails no longer returned. At first, she thought it was grief, people moving on, fatigue setting in. But then she looked at her driver's license. The name was gone, just a white smear where Anya Holt had once been printed. She called her sister. The line rang twice, clicked, then a voice answered. Hello, it's me, Anya. Sorry, who? Your sister. Silence. Then the voice, I don't have a sister. Click. She checked her birth certificate. Her name wasn't there. She walked to the post office. Her mailbox was empty. The clerk didn't recognize her. She handed over her ID. He squinted. This isn't real. She said her name aloud, louder, over and over. Each time it felt thinner, softer, like blowing breath into a cracked balloon. And that was the spiral's trick, its final shape, not horror, not silence, doubt. Anya realized what it was doing, not erasing her all at once, but peeling her away, one layer at a time. Not to scare her, but to convince her she had never mattered. That her fight against the spiral was just an anomaly, a glitch in the narrative. Now corrected, she ran back to the house. It still stood, still intact, still refusing to accept endings. But when she opened the door, her own handwriting was gone from the walls. Her breath didn't fog the mirror, and Nora's reflection didn't wait. Inside the house, she was a stranger. Even here, even now, because the spiral had found a new strategy. If it couldn't replace the hero, it would erase the one who remembered her. Anya sat on the floor of Nora's old room, breathing through her teeth, trying not to give in to the sinking feeling. She opened her notebook, her ledger of facts, names, scars, and memories, and found its pages blank. She hadn't burned it. She hadn't misplaced it. It had forgotten her. That's when she heard the voice again. Not loud, not cruel, just inevitable. You were never part of this. Anya stood. I was. The spiral didn't argue. It didn't have to. It just whispered. Prove it. That was its game now. It didn't demand belief. It demanded proof. And Anya had none. No name, no paper trail. No one left who remembered her. Except, she turned, frantic, to the mirror. Her face was still there. Her eyes. Nora's mirror. The cracked one, the only one that had ever shown the truth. It shimmered now, soft and warm. A heartbeat behind glass, and etched faintly in the bottom corner, scratched by a fingernail years ago, she stayed. It wasn't much. Not a monument, not a photograph, but it was something. Someone, Nora, maybe, had left her a breadcrumb. Anya pressed her palm against it, and for a moment everything stopped. The spiral recoiled, not in pain, but in uncertainty. It had spent itself in trying to replace Nora, then erase Anya, and now it found itself against a wall it didn't understand. Memory that didn't need to be believed to exist. Nora had never asked to be remembered. But Anya hadn't remembered her out of grief. She had remembered her out of defiance. The spiral's last tool, forgetting, couldn't kill defiance. It could erase the name, the records, the faces, but not the choice, not the act, not the echo. And in that echo, Anya began to write her name again, not in the ledger, not in ink, but in the space between the walls, where the spiral couldn't reach. She whispered it, soft and true, Anya Holt, and the house nodded, not physically, not literally. But something in its shape shifted in agreement. She wasn't part of the story. She was the margin the story couldn't fill in. And for the first time, she didn't need to prove it. She just was. The spiral had made its final move, and failed. Because some people don't fight to be remembered. They fight to remember. It didn't end with a bang. There was no final confrontation, no victorious monologue, no cleansing fire. The spiral did not scream as it died, because it didn't die. That's not how it worked. It wasn't a creature, wasn't a villain, wasn't even a force in the traditional sense. It was a need, a persistent itch in the back of the world's throat to keep telling, to give shape to silence, to trap time in cause and effect. It fed on connection, on narrative, on closure. But now, the story had no conclusion. It simply stopped. The town continued as a shadow of itself. People no longer remembered what they'd forgotten, and that became its own kind of peace. There was no mass awakening, no realization, just a gentle drift back into a life where questions didn't matter as much anymore. Some still glanced at corners too long. Others paused before entering certain rooms. A few saw their reflections flicker, but none spoke of it. Not out of fear, out of a quiet understanding that some things only exist when they're named. The house remained, still standing, still breathing in that quiet, unlit way. A place shaped by defiance, held together not by nails and wood, but by the echo of a decision Nora had made once and never retracted. She hadn't ended the spiral. She had stepped out of it. She'd chosen not to be a story, not to be remembered, not to allow her pain, her resistance, her rebellion to be catalogued and moralized. And the world, confused by that refusal, had been left holding an unfinished thread. The spiral couldn't loop around a silence that wouldn't answer back. Anya never fully returned to the town's fold. She remained on its edges, in the house, in the places where memory struggled to root. People didn't forget her, not exactly. They just stopped needing to know her. She became part of the margins, the woman who watched, the one who remembered, the guardian of the story that never wanted telling. And that was enough, because Nora's story, in the end, had never belonged to the spiral. It had never belonged to fear, or mystery, or even meaning. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't anything complete. It was just a moment of choice, stretching out into the unknown, refusing the cycle, refusing the conclusion, refusing to be made palatable or repeatable. The spiral didn't vanish. Not really. You can still feel it sometimes. When you look too long at a pattern that seems off. When you find yourself caught in a memory that loops. When a voice says your name in an empty room, and you want, badly, to answer. That's the spiral, pressing lightly at the door, asking if you'll open it again. Not because it's powerful, but because you are, because your belief is the thread it needs to weave its return. But now, someone knows. Someone remembers. Anya, the silent margin. The witness not erased. She doesn't write it down anymore. She doesn't scream it into mirrors. She simply holds it, like a candle in a place that will always want to go dark. There is no final line, no last word, only this: the spiral waits. But so does she. And in the absence of a story, there is freedom. There is stillness. There is truth without structure. The refusal lives on, unwritten and untouchable.